Chapter 298. Soon, it's time. Above the sea of flowers, the white-haired woman said with a hint of sadness and reluctance. Luo didn't reply and only responded with silence. However, for our first meeting, it's already quite long. We even went on a date and had a wonderful time together. Why do you want to go on a date with me? For something like a date, it can't be just because I can bring you out of death, right? Is a witch the kind of person who would seek to repay a favor before doing it? Under Altatia's astonished gaze, the black-haired young man tilted his head and looked at the witch. His golden eyes were filled with rationality and calmness. The delicate fragrance of flowers filled his nose. Altatia's skin and white hair seemed to glow under the contrast of her dark-colored dress. The two of them looked at each other for a long time. After a long time, the witch curled her lips and narrowed her scarlet eyes. Of course not. How can there be such a person among the witches? Altatia stood up, and the delicate and cute expression on her face faded slightly. Facing Luo's question, for the first time, she revealed a joyful smile like a witch with hidden meaning. The reason for going on a date with you is very simple. Because you are the only existence who is qualified to walk side by side with me. Hearing the unexpected answer, Luo's pupils contracted slightly. Altatia smiled, and then suddenly changed the topic. Ah, right, there's one more thing that I've always wanted someone to try. Heh, what do you think it is? Altatia revealed a mischievous smile. Without waiting for Luo's reply, she reached out and snapped her fingers. The next moment, the young man's vision changed, and he appeared on the throne in the middle of the sea of flowers. How is it? The view here is very wide, right? The sudden change of position made Luo widen his eyes. Altatia's voice immediately entered his ears. The young man tilted his head and saw the witch standing beside the throne with a smile. I'm watching everything from here, so I've always wanted others to experience this feeling. However, I can't easily give away something that I've used. But since it's you, it's fine. How is it? Do you like it? Luo didn't know how to answer for a moment as he looked at the witch who was smiling sweetly and looking expectantly at him. Seeing this, Altatia raised her finger and exclaimed, as if she had thought of something. Ah, right, no one is allowed to stand next to the throne. I made a mistake. The white-haired girl shyly stroked her cheeks and disappeared in the next moment. When she reappeared, she was already below the high platform. If it's my position, it should be here. Looking around with a face full of novelty, Altatia turned her head to look at Luo, curled her lips, and lifted her skirt to salute. When the witch queen obediently lowered her head, a strange feeling began to grow in Luo's heart. It was a feeling of superiority, power, possessiveness, and control. It was a feeling of omnipotence and wanting to control everything. As expected, there are still people below. How about it? If you look from there, the people below look very small, right? That's right. Luo, whose golden eyes lit up slightly, hesitated for a moment before nodding slightly. Altatia blinked her eyes as she saw this, and her smile became even brighter. Does Lord Hero want to be king? What? I'm already sick of that place, but Lord Hero hasn't sat on it yet, right? No, I don't have such intentions. Chapter 299. In the room, Luo's body stiffened as he held the box in his hand. A series of system notifications popped up in his mind. Ding. Detected mutated crown stone. Preparing to reconstruct bloodline. The system notification and the contents revealed allowed Luo to instantly understand what was in his hand. It was the crown stone. Luo was so excited that his hands trembled slightly. He was not in a good state. The Gulen Dea and Pei Taylor could not be contacted. Lillian was missing, and it was hard to tell whether Altatia was good or evil. Luo really needed power, and what the crown stone represented was self-explanatory. So far, apart from the help of the ancient gods, Luo's greatest combat power was the frozen earth touch, skill brought by the crown stone. It could be said that this was his trump card to overcome all the difficulties. Thinking of this, the teenager carefully opened the box. The dense spell seals immediately came into view. The internal structure of the box was divided into 2 layers. The first layer was the body of the box, and the lock were engraved with strange words. The second layer was a transparent gem. In the middle of the crystal-clear gem, a cloud of air the size of a fingernail was slowly rolling. Its shape was like a vague human figure. The moment he saw the strange dusk-colored cloud of chaotic air, a name popped up in Luo Ye's mind. It was one of the 6 disasters of the mother goddess mentioned by Isha Bela. It was also a terrifying existence in the legends that destroyed many long-lived races, including the Ents. The Wind Summoner. This was the name given to it by the ancient Ents. Cade once mentioned it to Luo Ya. Legend said that it could only be seen in the hazy moments before death. It was a blurry figure that covered the sky and earth in the sandstorm. It could not be understood, could not be communicated, and always looked down on the world with a faceless face. This was the sacred artifact. Luo Ya stared at the wind summoner in his hand that was still in the egg form. He finally understood why the Brotherhood of Redemption was afraid. He also sighed at the madness of the Saint Heroes Society's higher-ups. Fortunately, Santos and the others had killed the saint. Otherwise, the whole of Leinster would have been in grave danger in front of the wind summoners, and would have been wiped off the map. As expected, a cult was a cult. They might have the same goal as normal people for a while, but their different views would only lead to a greater tragedy in the end. Holding the box containing the egg in his hand, Luo Ya pondered for a moment and didn't choose to absorb it immediately. Right now, he still needed this thing to deter the other party and balance the situation. Moreover, when he recalled the last time he absorbed the egg of the frozen earth creator, Luo Ya felt a little guilty. But at the same time, he also made a discovery. The wind summoner's egg was a sparkling gem, and it seemed to be an imitation of the Sorophia's gem curse. The frozen earthmaker's egg was a golden soul seal. Both of the Highland Elf specialties were methods to restrict the 6 disasters. Was this a coincidence? After pondering for a long time, Luo Ya shook his head and didn't delve into it. He then signaled Bradley to write a letter to agree to a meeting at noon the next day. After a night of chaotic battle, the Saint Heroes Society's believers were exhausted and needed rest. Moreover, noon was the time when the black-armored monsters were least active, so such an arrangement should be just right. After finalizing the details of the ceasefire negotiations, the black-haired young man asked about the contact with St. Freya's Academy. Luo Ya didn't come here to be a cult leader. He didn't have the noble character of a comrade who established a country to hide his identity to complete his mission. Being able to leave this den of thieves and enter the academy was something Luo Ya wished for, and the reply he received was indeed satisfactory. According to Bradley, when the garrison retreated into the academy, some of the wounded fell behind. In order to avoid the monsters, they fled to the Saint Heroes Society's territory. At that time, the Saint Heroes Society was in a difficult situation and naturally didn't have time to care about them. However, the situation was different now, and they could be used as messengers. After receiving the news, Luo Ya's eyes lit up, and he immediately went to meet the remaining soldiers. When the black-haired young man entered, the wounded soldiers were still very alert. However, to their surprise, Luo Ya didn't make any sarcastic remarks, nor did he take them hostage. Instead, he let them all go. In the face of a common threat, different species can work together, let alone us humans. Letting all of you leave is my sincerity. Give this to General Antonio and tell him that I have something important to discuss with him. After handing one of the symbols of the Saint Heroes Society, Cade Steel Amber, to the leader of the wounded soldiers, Luo Ya let them go. Until the end, the young man didn't reveal the news of the current dean, Pris. The main reason for hiding this matter was that Luo Ya's current identity couldn't be revealed. The difference in status between the two was too big. When the cult leader said not to trust his own respected dean, not to mention General Antonio, even Luo Ya himself felt that it was nonsense. If the wounded soldiers heard it, they might think that he was trying to shake the morale of the army and directly refuse to pass on the message. In that case, wouldn't Luo Ya's efforts be in vain? After thinking about it, Luo Yue realized that it was useless to say anything. He simply didn't want to look for trouble. After letting the wounded soldiers go, the young man rested in peace to recover his condition and prepared for the next day's peace talks. Throughout the night, the situation at the Saint Hero Society's front line was relatively calm for the first time since the automatic chaos. Although there were sporadic monster attacks throughout the night, they were all killed by the believers' curses and didn't lose any territory. Regarding this, Luo Yue's behavior was very strange. Although it was possible for the two armies to cease fire in advance before the war negotiations, now both sides were not disciplined armies, but fierce cultists. The wording in Santos's letter was extremely strong. Normally, they should be attacking with all their strength tonight to regain the momentum they lost yesterday and fight for chips for today's negotiations. Why was there no movement at all? The strange Luo Yue worried that there was a trap and that he had taken advantage of the Saint Hero Society's network. As a result, he learned from the undercover that the Brotherhood of Redemption seemed to have a fire in their backyard. Last night, they sent a large number of troops to the South City district. The situation seemed to be so serious that the higher-ups ordered a lockdown on the news, so he didn't know the specific situation. Chapter 300. What was the best way to attack a person? The simplest way was no different from a physical attack, but in most cases, this was inevitably too rude and would arouse a strong reaction. In the absence of a physical attack, it was also a good choice to attack the opponent's spirit. There were many ways to attack the spirit. This time, facing Luo Yue, Santos chose to attack in the way of life. Unlike the Saint Hero Society, which advocated the pursuit of miracles, the Brotherhood of Redemption advocated indulgence. While they pursued great power, they were inevitably tainted with madness. Without the restraint of reason, their desires would become more and more naked. Under the mixture of various desires, their lives were destined to be extravagant and licentious. These were simply too tempting for teenagers with weak wills, especially those who had yet to form a worldview. Santos had actually heard of the cultivation method of the saints. He heard that they were constantly injected with a strange curse vessel from an early age. It seemed to be a synthetic curse vessel that simulated the bloodline of an ancient family. Those who could integrate well and survive had the opportunity to become a saint. The saints were tools, and they were also one-time tools to activate the Saint Hero Society's trump card. Other than adaptability, they did not need to be cultivated vigorously. Therefore, their general strength was not high. They lived in the Saint Hero Society's council and lived almost an isolated life in their childhood. Their understanding of the outside world was very limited. In the end, they were country bumpkins who had never seen the world. They probably had never even touched a woman's hand. In the cheers of the guests, Santos walked down the stairs and came to the other end of the long table where Luo Yue was. The moment he sat down, the music began to ring slowly again. The men and women of the Brotherhood of Redemption resumed their activities. The waiter stepped forward and respectfully served him the mixed wine. Opposite him, Luo Yue was unattended. There was nothing on the table until Santos accidentally discovered this impolite scene. He exaggeratedly reprimanded the waiter. The reprimand was neither light nor heavy, made the men and women behind him cover their mouths and chuckle. The waiter who obeyed the order served a glass of wine in front of Luo Yue. His words and actions were quite casual. His attitude was casual, and the wine was naturally mixed casually. Luo Yue glanced at the glass. He had no interest in this charity. He raised his eyes, looked at the middle-aged man opposite him, and asked faintly, "Mr. Santos, if I remember correctly, we are going to negotiate a truce, right?" "That's right, Mr. Envoy." "Then what is this absurd banquet? I don't see your sincerity." About this, Mr. Luo Yue seems to have misunderstood. "This is our way of showing our friendliness." Santos looked back at the crowd on the dance floor and the men and women who were intoxicated by the smell of alcohol. He explained with a smile, "Don't worry. We, the Brotherhood of Redemption, are a truthful and self-obedient organization. The Lord gave us strength and gave us a better life. The banquet is a way for us to relax and be honest with each other."
"Oh,
So this is your welcoming ceremony for me. Of course, we are very sincere, and even unguarded. The middle-aged man said as he waved his hand, and a beautiful young girl immediately came from behind. Santos put his arm around the young girl's slender waist and pulled her into his arms amidst the woman's laughter. He smiled at the young man who was looking at him calmly. But I admit that I didn't think it through. Mr. Luo is a saint. You live in a different environment from us. You probably haven't experienced this kind of life, right? Facing the young man's silence, Santos's smile became deeper and deeper. He touched the young girl's body twice and asked with a smile, Mr. Luo, have you experienced it? What? Have you experienced the feeling of being a woman? Hearing Santos's explicit words, Luo's face sank slightly. He raised his eyebrows and said faintly, Mr. Santos, this is not a topic we need to talk about. Of course not, but we can talk about that later. I think we should reach a friendly relationship before that. This is the basis of negotiation. This banquet actually has this purpose. What? Listening to the middle-aged man's fallacy, Luo, who had been mocked since he entered the door, frowned. Santos stood up and proposed. In order to express friendship, how about we dance together according to the custom of the country of scholars? Although Mr. Luo is away from worldly affairs, you should have no problem dancing, right? Santos's smile was a little mocking, and the men and women behind him also looked at him with mocking eyes. Chapter 301. Inside the Westminster Mansion, a rather magical scene was unfolding at this time. In front of the crowd, Lillian, who was holding Luo's hand, spoke indifferently and plainly. She didn't even have any murderous intent, but in reality, she was bidding farewell to Her Royal Highness the Empress. In the rumbling sound of the ground shaking, all the doors and windows in the Westminster Mansion were smashed into pieces at the same time. Wood chips and glass debris wrapped the heavily armored knights and rushed into the banquet hall from all directions to surround the enemy. Those were the knights in unusually heavy dark blue armor, holding shields and spears on their backs. They had sharp longswords, neighing horses, and fluttering flags with the pattern of a blue spear. When they rushed into the hall, the crowd panicked and screamed. Luo looked up and stared at the knights. Her pupils couldn't help but shrink. This flag. The Blue Knights of the ancient Austin Empire, the strong force that left a mark in history, suddenly appeared in front of her. This strong impact made Luo couldn't help but widen her eyes. However, everything wasn't over yet. When the people in the banquet hall shouted and the horses neighed, a low horn suddenly sounded, followed by a strange sound. Wah, wah, wah. The strange sound came from outside the window and became louder and louder. The panicked guards ran to the window to check, and then their faces turned ashen. As the sound source got closer and closer, everyone present knew what it was. It was the sound of uniform footsteps. Unknowingly, the entire Westminster Mansion had been surrounded by countless soldiers. Large shields and heavy armor were connected together, reflecting the sunlight. The flags were like a forest, and the horns were incessant. The marching footsteps were like stepping on people's hearts. Under the protection of the knights, Lillian's purple eyes were as cold as ice. She looked at the gloomy Santos as if she was looking at a dead man. Source rank 2 was indeed strong, but it was only one level higher than Lillian. However, the difference in combat power between the two was like heaven and earth. In front of these fearless warriors who had come out of history to defend the great ancient Austin Empire, a level 2 source level fighter like Santos was just a little bit of a challenge. In fact, the leader of the Brotherhood of Redemption did not dare to move because there were nearly 100 level 4 source level Blue Knights in the mansion alone. Although Lillian was alone, she had thousands of troops. This banquet seemed to be surrounded by the Brotherhood of Redemption, but in fact, they were surrounded by Lillian alone. The men and women in the banquet hall didn't know where the troops came from. Some were trembling, some begging for mercy, but the knights didn't respond. Lillian didn't show mercy either. Anyone who bullied her brother was unforgivable to Lillian's sister. But after thinking about it, the young lady decided to let Luo's choice. The black-haired boy just recovered from the shock of seeing the army that seemed to come out of a history book. After thinking for a while, Roher shook his head gently. It's still too early. The black-haired young man clasped Lillian's hand, trying to comfort his sister who was brimming with killing intent. Unexpectedly, not only did Lillian not show any dissatisfaction, but she even blushed and looked at the young man with eyes full of love. Then forget it. Saying so, he waved his hand gently, and the sound of the horn immediately stopped. The knights also lowered their swords, pointing at the crowd. The atmosphere in the mansion relaxed a little. Santos secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but this time it was Luo Ye who smiled. Mr. Santos, thank you for your kindness this time. I'm very satisfied with this banquet, but I don't think it's the right time for negotiation. What do you think? Perhaps that is the case. Glancing at the tall knights nearby, Santos answered with an ugly expression. Santos didn't know where this army came from, but it was obvious that they didn't participate in the previous battle, which meant that this was a fresh army. Anyone who suddenly gained new strength would display it on the battlefield to gain a greater advantage. Negotiation would definitely be after that. That was why Santos didn't speak nonsense, and Luo Ye didn't waste any time either. Well then, goodbye. Have fun. After saying those words with a smile that made Santos's cheeks twitch, the black-haired young man bid farewell and left. On both sides of the carpet, the tall knights lined up in 2 rows, forming a long corridor with their lances. Luo Ye and Lillian walked through the corridor hand in hand, heading out of the mansion. Looking at the back of the two of them, Santos's face was flushed red, and he gritted his teeth. But then, as if he thought of something, his expression calmed down, and he even showed a mocking smile. Enjoy yourselves, in the last moments of your lives. Outside the door, Lillian's magnificent army retreated and disappeared one by one. Luo Ye looked at this scene with indescribable shock in his heart. All the armies, regardless of whether it was the cavalry or the infantry, were the trump cards of the ancient Austin Empire from different eras. And now, these warriors who didn't compete with each other in their lives were gathered together to protect the queen who brought them out of history. Although Luo Ye had vaguely sensed Lillian's strength when they confronted each other, he never thought that she would be this strong. If Roher could be said to be someone who had developed and surpassed the foundation of the Acate family's bloodline and origin substance, then Lillian was the chosen one who had combined the Acate family's bloodline and the origin substance of the Acate family. To a certain extent, she was a miracle. Chapter 302. The moment their lips touched, Luo Ye's mind went blank. Logically speaking, playing with fire with words shouldn't have been too much of a provocation. The black-haired young man's greatest wish was to calm Lillian down, but the result was far beyond his expectations. Lillian's kiss was clumsy. It was obvious that she didn't have any experience in kissing him. It was purely an act of excitement. However, when it landed on Luo Ye's lips, a strange feeling suddenly arose in the young man's body. It was his brain overheating and the impulse to get closer. It was obvious that this impulse wasn't unique to him. Lillian was driven by this almost instinctive action and couldn't help but kiss him. The intense kiss lasted for quite a while before Luo Ye finally snapped back to his senses and grabbed the young woman's wrist. Huff, huff, senior sister. Wake up. Luo Ye, calm down, senior sister. We're still in the car. Luo Ye's reminder caused Lillian's purple eyes to regain some clarity. After a momentary daze, Lillian's cheeks immediately turned as red as blood. No, I understand, senior sister. I understand. Calm down. The black-haired young man comforted her while hugging the young woman tightly. Feeling the warm embrace, Lillian, who was leaning on the young man's shoulder, calmed down slightly. In the narrow space, the two of them didn't move at all. Their breathing gradually calmed down. Senior sister, are you feeling better? Yeah, about what happened just now. I'm sorry. I was too excited. It's okay. We've never met blood relatives before. Before Lillian could finish speaking, Luo Ye hurriedly comforted her. Luo Ye naturally wouldn't take advantage of being kissed by Her Highness the Empress for nothing. However, he had to admit that Lillian's kiss was very childish. It felt like a chick pecking at rice. It even felt a little itchy. Wait, if that's the case, don't tell me. Senior sister, have you kissed anyone before? Roher thought of a key question and asked softly. Lillian's body stiffened, and after a long silence, she shook her head in embarrassment. I knew it. Is it very uncomfortable? Do you hate it? No, not at all. Faced with Lillian's question, Luo Ya resolutely denied it. He felt the young lady's body and even felt as if he was dreaming. In fact, Luo Ya had this feeling ever since he learned that Lillian was his blood relative, and it was even more intense now. Although Lillian's first kiss was only a light peck, it was already unprecedented intimacy for this ice beauty. If this matter were to spread, it would probably drive countless suitors in the Austin Empire crazy. Although I've seen records of blood relatives having feelings of closeness, senior sister, isn't our effect a little too strong? Perhaps it's because there are differences in the kinship between different bloodlines. Lillian explained as she recalled the almost greedy feeling in her body. Luo Ya nodded in agreement. Indeed, the probability of two Akut family bloodlines appearing in one generation was too low. It seemed normal for her to be unusually excited, but this was too much. Luo Ya sighed as he thought about this. Other people's bodies were controlled by their thoughts, but Luo Ya and Lillian's bodies were affected by their bloodlines. The two of them couldn't do anything about this situation. It was as if this was fate that they couldn't defy. After a long silence, their breathing calmed down. Luo Ya then recalled an important piece of information. Chapter 303. Lillian's arrival was generally smooth, and it did not arouse any unusual reaction from the Saint Hero Society. After all, Luo Ya now had a group of fanatics around him who thought that he was the saint's envoy. It could be said that he had absolute authority. If Luo Ya said that there was no problem, then there was no problem. Not only that, but unlike Luo Ya, Lillian was quite revered as soon as she arrived. One of the reasons was naturally that the believers of the Saint Hero Society did not know the true identity of the two, and the other reason was Lillian's strength and achievements. Wouldn't they be fools if they didn't want a level 3 source ranker? Moreover, Lillian's level 3 source ranker was completely different from ordinary extraordinaires of the same level in terms of strength. Last night, in order to find Luo Ya, Lillian's various legions of the ancient Austin Empire almost pierced the Brotherhood of Redemptions as full of holes, greatly relieving the pressure on the Saint Hero Society. This kind of individual achievement was simply appalling. As for their identity, Luo Ya and Lillian decided to pretend to be a couple instead of siblings for the time being after serious consideration. The main reason was that although both of them looked good, their styles were too different. Luo Ya was the gentle type, while Lillian was a cold beauty with completely different eye colors. On the other hand, setting them as a couple could also prevent Lillian from being questioned because she did not understand the Saint Hero Society. This was undoubtedly much more convenient. The Saint Hero Society was still very tolerant of the marriage of believers. Although they were not as indulgent as the Brotherhood of Redemption, there was no problem with having a couple. After all, this was also a way to attract new believers. As Lillian's appearance and temperament were too noble, and her strength was far beyond the level that should be at her age, she was once thought to be a child of a great aristocrat somewhere. Traveling alone to find Luo Ya was too similar to eloping, so no one dared to ask her surname. This could be said to have saved Luo Ya a lot of trouble, but it could only be said that the truth was often more exaggerated than people's imagination. Lillian's background was far from being summarized by a great aristocrat. Luo Ya thought so and turned his head to look at the girl. The latter tilted her head slightly in a questioning manner. Her gentle and somewhat cute look made Luo Ya's heart skip a beat. Senior sister. You look really good in a gown. Luo Ya changed the topic at the last minute in order to conceal his feelings. Unexpectedly, Lillian's cheeks blushed slightly as if she was very happy. The atmosphere between the two of them became more harmonious as a result. Both of them had a strange feeling in their hearts as if they were a real couple. Outsiders would naturally find it hard to tell if it was real or fake. Due to the complete breakdown of the negotiations, the Saint Heroes Association immediately strengthened their defense work after Luo Yue returned. It was almost certain that a fierce battle was inevitable. However, unlike before, Luo Yue did not want to participate in the next fierce battle. After successfully meeting up with Lillian, Luo Yue's biggest goal in the Saint Heroes Assembly was achieved. All that was left was to wait for the Academy to contact him. During this time, Luo Yue also had time to check on his system. When Luo Yue saw the score, he was a little surprised. After all, in his opinion, he did not do anything significant during this period of time. He didn't even kill any monsters. Although he met up with Lillian, it was mostly due to Lillian herself. After meeting up with her, she even helped him out. But this matter shouldn't have increased his score by so much. So, could it be that something else had happened? For example, the pendant that he sent to the Academy. Could it have caused some changes? With this thought in mind, Luo Yue's eyes lit up. He used the score to deduce a piece of good news. But considering the situation, Luo Yue reckoned that the Academy's Sage Society and the others would not act too quickly. After all, they were neither relatives nor friends. In this situation, even if they were members of the Sage Society, they would probably have to consider before taking action. During this period of time, Luo Yue and Lillian were waiting, but at the same time, it was also time for them to rest. Lillian had been fighting for 2 days and 2 nights in a row, so she naturally needed to rest. Luo Yue was also frozen last night due to the side effects of the touch of frigid earth. As soon as they saw each other today, he immediately felt exhausted. After arranging everything, Luo Yue immediately brought Lillian back to their room to rest. Now that the two of them were a couple, it was naturally impossible for them to stay in separate rooms. But even if they could, they didn't want to be apart. The two of them who had just found each other after being separated emotionally had some repercussions. It was even more so when it came to safety. Now that the two of them were spies in the enemy camp, no matter what they did in the future, staying together was the best plan. Lillian was naturally aware of this, but the two of them had a rare argument over where to sleep. "I'm the elder sister, so you'll sleep on the bed. I'm the man, so of course you'll sleep on the bed." Both of their reasons were too good, so they refused to give in to each other. But in the end, the result was very harmonious. As they were in the enemy camp, after some discussion, they decided to take turns sleeping. One slept while the other guarded. This way, there wasn't much to argue about. After being frozen last night due to the side effects, Luo Yue technically hadn't slept for 5 days. Even though he was an extraordinary, his body couldn't take it after experiencing so many events. On the other hand, Lillian had been sleeping for 2 days after entering the historical fragment, so Luo Yue slept first tonight. From the time he returned to his room after dinner until close to midnight, Luo Yue slept soundly under the protection of Lillian. The sense of security from having a loved one by his side gave him a good rest. As for Lillian, she also had a good time during this period. Looking at the young man sleeping soundly on the bed, the black-haired girl couldn't help but smile. Lillian was feeling wonderful now. It was the feeling of suddenly gaining someone important. In terms of feelings, it was almost like a young girl who suddenly fell in love. Just thinking about it made her happy. Just seeing it made her want to get close to it. Just listening to the sound of his breathing made her heart feel warm. This was a feeling she had never felt before. It made her feel as if she had found a treasure. But just like sugar, an appropriate amount was fine. Too much would lead to obesity. Lillian also knew that she couldn't look at him too much. Otherwise, her bloodline would probably cause her to lose control of her feelings. After letting out a sigh, she reluctantly left the room. Her Royal Highness the Empress waited quietly in the small reception room outside the room. Chapter 304. In front of the throne, the beautiful witch was holding a corolla as she looked at the young man in front of her with a radiant smile on her face. "How about it? Why don't you give it a try?" The witch's persuasive voice entered Luo Yue's ears, followed by the rising desire in his heart. The black-haired young man looked at the corolla in Altatia's hand in a daze, but his golden eyes quickly returned to normal. "No need. Thank you for your kind intentions, but I'm not interested. The young man's face sank slightly as a sense of danger rose in his heart while looking at the witch's reply. Altacia pouted when she heard his reply, then sighed a moment later. I've been collecting it for a long time, don't you think it's very compatible with you? A crown or something? The crown is my origin substance, but it's not my will, Roher said as he stood up and stepped away from Altacia's throne. He looked at the witch and said softly, Altacia, don't tempt me with this anymore, I'm not interested in being a king. Sigh, as expected. After a moment of silence, the white-haired witch sighed as she gently put the corolla on her head, then leaned forward towards the young man as if to close the distance between them for a kiss, forcing Luo to raise his body slightly. How distressing. Is it because you've witnessed too many ups and downs? It's been so many years since left, even we have given up, but you're still clinging to your duties. But forget it, I more or less expected this outcome. Altacia straightened her body, seemingly giving up on tempting the black-haired young man with the throne. Luo stared at the witch in front of him and suddenly said, Altacia, what's your purpose? Purpose, I've said it before, I hope that Sir Hero can let that girl be my host. That's not the truth, at least not all of it. Luo interrupted the witch's words and calmly stated his conclusion. Altacia blinked her eyes, tilted her head and asked curiously, Why do you say that? The reason why witches are called witches is because they can't be understood by ordinary people. At first, I thought you wanted to resurrect in the real world, but after thinking about it, is this really the wish of an existence like the Queen of Witches? Under Luo's words and gaze, Altacia was first surprised, then the corners of her mouth gradually curled up. She seemed to enjoy listening to Luo's questioning, her narrowed eyes filled with joy. Isn't it too hasty to judge based on rumors? Does the witch have to resort to trickery? Stereotypes aren't good. Stereotype? Altacia is the real one, isn't she? She rigidly thinks that her image, actions, expression, and tone that men like can make me like her. That's why she acted so vividly. Hey, why did he say that? Can't I be a demoness that's lovable? Altacia, you've never called me by my name, have you? When Luo asked this question, the white-haired witch was slightly taken aback, then the corners of her mouth uncontrollably curled up. Luo said calmly, You didn't call me by my name and have always referred to me as Sir Hero. Actually, it's because you know that I'm using a fake name. As for the reason, it's because you've already verified it when I said it, right? The young man's pupils constricted as he stared at the witch, his tone was as cold as ice. What did you use? Curse? Or some other curse technique? Oh, really, Sir Hero, you're thinking too badly of Altacia. I didn't use any curse technique. Facing Luo's furious gaze, the white-haired witch's cheeks flushed red. She pouted as though she was angry, but she also seemed to be very happy. I only used the name Luo to try a curse technique to see through one's heart, but it didn't work at all. See through one's heart? That's right, even I can't see through the crown. To me, who can always know what others are thinking, you're like an unknown creature. Wouldn't I have no clue how to deal with you at this time? Altacia's temperament changed slightly as she spoke, gradually revealing her true nature. Her innocent and cute expression was slightly restrained, turning into a rational but excited smile. Chapter 305. Looking at the alarm clock on the table, Luo tidied up his clothes and sighed helplessly. According to the agreement, the two of them would change shifts at midnight. However, the clock had already passed midnight, but there was still no one knocking on the door. Lillian didn't wake him up. The black-haired young man recalled the experience in his dream. Although Altacia was troublesome, it was good that she woke him up on time. Otherwise, Luo might have slept until the next day. After tidying up his appearance, the young man walked out of the room and saw Her Royal Highness sitting outside elegantly and dutifully guarding the room. Lillian's purple eyes flashed with surprise when she saw Luo waking up. According to her observation not long ago, Luo should be sleeping soundly. What's wrong? Why did you suddenly wake up? Because it's time. Senior, why didn't you wake me up? My level is higher than yours. Besides, what's wrong with giving my time to my younger brother? Hearing Lillian's matter-of-fact words, Luo Ye supported his forehead with his hand and felt helpless. Senior, go to sleep immediately. But, preserve the state of high-level combat strength. This is the foundation of the strategy class. Although it's a little depressing to say this, my combat strength is limited here. There are probably many things that I need Senior's help with. I understand. As if hearing that she was needed, Lillian's mood improved instantly. She obediently went to sleep. After stretching and sitting down, Luo Ye began to prepare for tonight's battle. That's right. There was another reason why Luo Ye went to sleep first. According to the movement patterns of the black-armored soldiers and black-clothed clergy, the fierce battle between the two cults would usually take place in the middle of the night. This way, even if there was a battle, Luo Ye, who was awake, could handle it. Lillian didn't have to worry about it. However, the young man didn't expect that despite all his calculations, he had miscalculated the situation tonight. Not only was the situation urgent, but the front line tonight was calm and peaceful. What's going on? Could it be that Lillian's participation has caused the enemy to be wary and not dare to attack easily? Luo Ye couldn't understand this calmness and felt slightly uneasy. While he was thinking, he suddenly heard a scream from the room. Luo Ye! Upon hearing Lillian's call, the young man widened his eyes and rushed into the bedroom in a flash. But to his surprise, there were no enemies in the room. Only Lillian sat up on the bed and panted heavily. Did he have a nightmare? Looking at the girl with purple eyes trembling uneasily, Luo Ye, who had discovered the truth, was slightly taken aback, and immediately blamed himself for his carelessness. Too many things had happened in the past few days, causing him to neglect Lillian's mental state. Before entering the historical fragment, Lillian had been traumatized by the tragic death of her friend. After that, not only did the series of shocking events fail to calm her mind, but she became even more unstable because of Luo Ye's disappearance. It was fine if she could control herself rationally when she was awake, but it was normal for her to have nightmares when she fell asleep. Thinking of this, Luo Ye felt pity for her and hurriedly said, Senior, calm down. I'm here. Luo Ye. Lillian's body trembled slightly as she looked at the young man who walked to her bedside and softly comforted her. She was stunned for a moment before she opened her arms and hugged him tightly. She greedily inhaled the young man's scent. After a while, the black-haired girl who had replenished her Luo Ye finally calmed down. Seeing this, Luo Ye moved a chair and sat in front of the bed. He held the girl's hand and coaxed Lillian to sleep. Senior, I'll be right here and not go anywhere. Sleep well. After hearing Luo Ye's words, Lillian, who felt strangely embarrassed, hid half of her face under the blanket. However, she couldn't bear to let go of Luo Ye. After hesitating for a long time, she could only nod silently. But after lying down on the bed, her purple eyes kept peeking at Luo Ye. Chapter 306. Estrella Ald. When the name came into sight, Luo Ye's brain couldn't help but turn blank. Odd. Is it that odd? Thinking of the Eagle of Shadow during the ancient Austin Empire, the original family of the Ackett family, the black-haired boy was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but feel excited. Luo Ye never thought that in the 600 years of the Third Era, this ancient family that could not be found in records and only existed by word of mouth actually still had members alive. If this was the case, Cade's words made sense. No wonder, Scholar was a core member of the Twilight Sage Association. She was completely one of their own. As a member of the Odd family and a Scholar of the Twilight Sage Association, Istrid must have more information than Luo Ye could imagine. At the thought of this, the black-haired boy had an impulse to fly over immediately. No, I have to calm down. Seeing the name of the ancestor, Luo Ye was excited for a moment before returning to his senses. Thinking of the situation of the Holy Heroes Association, he frowned and began to think seriously about how to implement this plan. Going to the north side of the academy tomorrow night was not a problem, but Luo Ye, who had the status of a holy envoy, sneaked out like this, which made him a little unwilling. The Brotherhood of Redemption didn't make a move tonight. The only possibility was that they were accumulating strength, and the outbreak was likely to be tomorrow night. If Luo Yue escaped at this juncture, then the Holy Heroes Association, which had lost its support, would be quickly defeated. At that time, the Brotherhood of Redemption would launch a large-scale attack on the city. Thinking so, Luo Yue thought, and the corners of his mouth gradually hooked up. The next morning, when Lillian's hazy consciousness gradually woke up, the first thing she felt was the warmth of her right hand. This is... Yes, it's Luo Yue. He's still here. The girl, who had just woken up, remembered the somewhat embarrassing scene last night and couldn't help but feel a little shy. However, she was a little happy that Luo Yue still stayed by her bed all night. Logically speaking, after Lillian fell asleep last night, there was no need for Luo Yue to hold her hand like this. However, the young man did not let go of her hand as promised. This was something that Lillian did not expect. It almost meant that Lillian was very important to Luo Yue. The warm emotions in her heart filled Lillian with motivation. The moment she opened her eyes, she felt as if the world was glowing. Lillian, who had never experienced something like this before, was at a loss for what to do. At the same time, she was intoxicated. Senior sister, you're awake? Good morning. Millimeter, good morning. In response to the young man's greeting, Lillian smiled faintly and replied with a good morning. However, she quickly recalled that she had just woken up and couldn't help covering her face. Senior. Don't look. I need to tidy up a little. Lillian's cheeks blushed slightly as she said this. Luo Yue was taken aback when he heard this. Then, he suddenly understood and left. Originally, Lillian had to bathe and wash her body every morning. But now, there were no servants in the castle, and many functions were damaged. The princess had no choice but to settle for the next best thing. After dressing up properly in front of the mirror, Lillian appeared in front of the young man again. Luo Yue glanced at the young lady who had hardly changed. He could only sigh at Lillian's natural beauty and then told her about the news from last night. According to the contents of the letter, Estrella and Antonio seemed to be guarding a certain curse vessel according to the orders of the Sage Society. In the context of the invasion of the mutants, the curse vessel that the scholar and others were guarding must be very important. If Luo Yue guessed correctly, this was probably the target of the Brotherhood of Redemption's rebellion. And judging from the time, the mystery of the destruction of the Sage Society that Luo Yue had been exploring was also likely to be related to this. After listening to the situation, Lillian nodded thoughtfully. But then, she was stunned by Luo Yue's other words. Madame Estrella is my ancestor? Well, strictly speaking, she is the ancestor of the Ackett family. But since Senior has the bloodline of the Ackett family, then your ancestors must also be related to the old family. Bloodlines wouldn't appear out of thin air. Lillian was different from most of the people in the family. The only possibility was that she had atavism. Sholo was a good example, and Lillian should be in the same situation. However, it would probably take some time for the princess to accept that her bloodline wasn't that of the royal family. After informing Luo Yue of the necessary information, he didn't disturb Senior anymore. After breakfast, Luo Yue began to gather the members of the Saint Heroes Society for a battle meeting. Chapter 307. A meteor fell from Leinster City. A few seconds after the flash was released, everyone reacted to it, be it north or south of the city, inside or outside the academy. It was a bright white meteor that seemed to contain endless radiance, beautiful and holy. However, what it contained was not warmth, but the coldness and despair that led people to death. Senior. Everything happened too quickly. In the next second when Luo Yue noticed the shining light, the light had dyed everything nearby white. In the distance, an old man in a black robe looked at the place where the meteor fell, his face emotionless. Plist Maxhill. This was a name that was praised in this era. When people mentioned him, the first thing that came to mind was the image of a wise and gentle old man. The followers of Bologna called him the saint, the scholars hailed him as the wisest chairman in history, and the extraordinary people called him the King of Curses. Over the countless years, Prista had received too many honors and shouldered a considerable amount of responsibility. But today, as he looked at the falling light, the old man's face was no longer warm and gentle. Instead, it was cold and solemn. It had been 100 years since he fell into the hands of the Savior. After 100 years of planning, Plist was finally about to achieve his goal, but at this crucial moment, an unexpected person came to Leinster. The Ackett family was a family that could not be carelessly handed down, especially their bloodline awakeners. For these chosen children who bore heavy burdens, anything was possible. This was the conclusion that Plist had given them over the long years. Whether it was the insurmountable gap in levels or the unbreakable iron rules, nothing was absolute before them. Their possibilities were far beyond the comprehension of ordinary people. It had been so since ancient times, and this time was no exception. Plist's slightly dim eyes looked into the distance. Under his attack, the entire area trembled, but the two targets did not turn into ashes. Where the light dissipated, what appeared was a huge skeleton and a giant black serpent that surrounded the two people. At this moment, the skeleton had mostly melted in the light, while the giant black serpent was almost shattered. Still, it had to be said that even without souls, these two curse power constructs had indeed protected their master. In the gradually dissipating form of the ancient god, the black-haired youth spat out blood. However, the pain of his body tearing apart did not diminish his will to fight. Instead, it made his will as cold as ice and unshakable. Frozen earth. Amidst the murmurs, white mist rushed out of the youth's body without holding back and tore at the old man who was holding a staff. At the same time, the deep sound of horns echoed from all directions. A powerful surge of curse power that had never been seen before erupted from Lillian's body. With Priest as the center, countless warriors walked out of the radiance and began their charge. Amidst the deafening battle cries, countless warriors stepped out of the radiance and began their charge. The heavy-armored legions with lions painted on their shields, the blue-armored knights with lances pointed forward, and the archers with strange mechanical curses on their arms, the most elite legions in human history began a joint encirclement under the Queen's command. Amidst the piercing sound, arrows of destruction imbued with elemental magic converged into a colorful cloud and fell from the sky. Beside Lillian, thousands of red-robed spellcasters held up their long staffs. The light of their curses was as bright as the stars. Obscure incantations echoed in their mouths as they worked together to create an army of curses that far exceeded their individual strength. After being attacked for a moment, the two of them who had a tacit understanding unleashed their killer moves almost at the same time. There was no other reason other than that the enemy gave them too much pressure. Amidst the frost, the youth's expression was unprecedentedly ugly. In front of him, Lillian shielded him behind her as if she was protecting him. However, her clenched hands were trembling slightly. Both of them could feel that the other party did not use his full strength in the blow just now, and that was indeed the case. That's right. The blow that shook the earth like a meteor was just a greeting from Plist. Even if he was destined to kill the other party and had even rushed here specifically for this, Plist did not like to ambush the younger generation. Giving the other party the right to fight back with all his might was his reservedness as the King of Curses, just like now. Under the moonlight, amidst the heavy encirclement of thousands of soldiers and horses, the horns of the barracks continued to sound. The earth trembled under the hooves of the horses, and the sky was covered by arrows and frost. However, in the face of all this, the black-robed old man remained unmoved. He looked at the young man and girl in the distance with his weathered eyes. After a long time, he only let out a sigh. How powerful! The heartfelt praise came from the mouth of the King of Curses. Luo was familiar with history. How could the knowledgeable Plist not know the origin of these soldiers? With this powerful army and that strange frost, even a powerhouse of the second level of the source rank would be easily annihilated by the combined forces of these two young men. If it was before the dark days, he would definitely protect these children with all his might. Unfortunately, it was all too late. Under the overwhelming attacks, Priest's body suddenly burst out with layers of light. The dark clouds of elemental arrows turned into ashes, and the frost that covered the ground was also dispersed. The old Cursemancer raised his long staff, and the holy statue on the staff suddenly seemed to come alive. The half-body banshee opened her arms and opened her mouth to let out a call of death. Cough. Not good. Luo Ya, who was coughing out a mouthful of blood, stared at the staff in the old man's hand. His expression changed drastically, and he reflexively thought of a holy weapon. Staff of the Deadman's Voice. It was a holy weapon described in the records of the scholar country. Legend had it that the cursed soul of a banshee resided in the staff. After it was activated, it would carry out a large-scale indiscriminate curse. It had once reaped tens of thousands of lives on the battlefield of the mutants. The terrifying weapon in the records flashed across his mind. The next moment, the cruel reality proved his thoughts. Within 100 meters of the old man, the knights that were charging towards Priest were falling to the ground in droves amidst the shrill cries. Be it man or horse, all of their presence vanished amidst the call of death. The black-haired girl abruptly widened her eyes, but after a brief moment of hesitation, she steeled her heart and continued to command the army to charge towards the old man. She must buy time for the legion of Cursemancers behind her to cast their spells. For that, she would pay any price. Determined, Lillian began to stall for time with all her might. The brave soldiers of the legion charged at the enemy dauntlessly. Layers of corpses piled up. The scene was unprecedentedly tragic. However, not a single one of them could get within 10 meters of Plist. Only the huge skeleton was not afraid of the terrifying curse. However, the Gulan Dea that had lost its soul could not pose a threat to the enemy. The frost and the rain of arrows were still being dispersed by the light. The battle cries shook the surroundings. Every minute and every second of the battle felt like a year. Until the chanting of the thousands of people stopped abruptly, and the inexplicable pressure in the sky was so strong that it could not be ignored. Only then did Lillian's purple eyes lit up again. Divine strike of the Legion curse. After a long period of preparation, it was finally completed. Chapter 308. He would die. Looking at Priest who was walking towards him, Luo Ya instinctively sensed his end. The severe injuries caused the young man's vision to turn black. He was about to collapse, but in the next moment, a hand supported his body. It was the girl whose mouth was also stained with blood. In the face of such a terrifying enemy, Lillian did not retreat in the face of danger. Instead, she faced the terrifying torrent of curses and walked to the front. Luo Ya may not have reached level 3 of source rank, but I have. The black-haired girl said as she looked at the young man who was unable to move and forced a smile. The next moment, she opened her hand towards the sky. Golden shards flowed out from her palm and landed on the remaining soldiers and the spellcasters. This is the shard of the crown? The young man whose vision was blurred thought with his remaining ability to think. Then, he heard Lillian's order. Stop him. With a simple command, the knights who were bathed in golden radiance and had broken through to third source roared. The spellcasters' spellcasting ripples also multiplied by several times. Even so, Plist remained unmoved as he stared at the seething warriors. In front of him, the number of enemies actually did not make much of a difference. What's the point of a useless struggle? Perhaps it is indeed meaningless. But, Lord of Curses, I am this child's elder sister. Under the heavy pressure that seemed to freeze her blood, the black-haired girl touched the young man's cheek with her trembling hand. The surging flow of curses blew her black hair. Her purple eyes narrowed because of the pain. However, when she raised her head again, there was only calmness and determination left on the girl's face. I'm standing up. This is my meaning. False feelings will only lead to death. The fallen Lord of Curses did not have any feelings for the girl's feelings. He said so and then raised his finger. What followed was a torrent of destruction. That was the light of destruction that could completely fill one's vision. It was a spell that the Lord of Curses casually cast. However, its power was far beyond the full-strength attack of an ordinary level 2 of source rank. In the face of this terrifying attack, Lillian quickly retreated. Even so, she could not escape. 10 cities, the black-haired girl murmured softly at the critical moment. Her purple eyes lit up like candlelight, and as the origin substance vibrated, 3 different city walls rose from the ground in response to her summons. The tall walls and deep city walls acted like shields, instantly blocking in front of the girl. In the distance, Pleist's eyes widened in shock. The 10 cities was something that could only be summoned by the kingdom origin substance of the Achaemen tribe. There were 10 fortresses that had existed in human history. They gathered the hopes of the people during the Age of Chaos and were the strongest defensive force. They were also Lillian's trump card. Under the protection of these legendary fortresses, the pursuing white light was indeed blocked outside the city. I didn't expect you to be able to summon such a thing. You're actually a mixed blood of the Aceman family. The black-robed old man widened his eyes in surprise. After a while, he shook his head. However, even if it's a legendary stronghold summoned by a level 3 source ranker, it won't be able to stop me. Pleist sighed. In the next moment, he raised his hand for the second time. The impact of the curse power that was comparable to divine punishment was released once again. This time, it was several times more powerful than the first time. Under this attack, the warriors who charged at him were reduced to ashes. The legendary fortresses also collapsed one by one. Lillian, who was retreating rapidly, was as pale as a sheet. However, as she felt the young man who was almost unconscious in her arms, the girl's heart was only filled with the promise she once made. I'll definitely protect you well. The feelings in her heart turned into the desire to protect. The black-haired girl who had made up her mind clenched 2 of her fingers. As her purple eyes contracted, she suddenly exerted her strength. Crack! Amidst the sound of finger bones breaking, the 3 fortresses that had collapsed and disappeared under Pleist's attack suddenly burst out with a blinding radiance. The 4th city, Fort Sepadro, and the 5th city, Sequogen, rushed out of the ground one after another. At the same time, 7 blue-robed sorcerers appeared out of thin air beside Lillian. They chanted at the same time. A strong wave of curse power spread out from the city, causing Pleist's expression to darken. So that's how it is. It's not to stop me, but to buy time and opportunity for the transfer curse? Pleist's eyes shone brighter as he spoke. After Luo Ya, Lillian's performance had completely stunned the King of Curses. 10 cities. That was an absolute defense that no external curse could harm or affect the people inside before it was destroyed. Leaving the first 3 cities aside, it was already a miracle that she could summon the 5th city as a level 3 source ranker. She was calm, decisive, and exceptionally talented. Even when she was heavily injured and in despair, she was still searching for a chance. I didn't expect that there would be 2 outstanding Akat bloodline users in the same era. The King of Curses sighed. However, in the next moment, a majestic killing intent enveloped in aurora and lightning came towards him. Chapter 309. On the city wall of St. Freya Academy, the young man's figure fell out of thin air amidst the flickering light. Cough. Luo Ya, who fell to the ground, coughed out a mouthful of blood. After experiencing severe injuries and teleportation, the young man was on the verge of death. But when he thought of Lillian, who sent him here, Luo Ya couldn't close his eyes and faint. He didn't come here because he had given up hope, but to pursue it. A chilly wind blew at a corner of the city wall. There was no one nearby, but the moment Luo Ya entered the enchantment, he felt that she was looking at him. Thinking of this, Luo Ya no longer hesitated. He endured the pain and pulled out his dagger, aimed at his heart, and stabbed it. But before the blade touched his body, a rainbow light suddenly appeared and blocked the blade. "What are you doing?" The angry female voice sounded just as Luo Ya expected. The black-haired young man raised his head and looked at his ancestor, who he forced out with her death. He knew that he had to persuade her to save Lillian as soon as possible. And the first thing he had to know was the reason why she didn't save Lillian. The location of their battle wasn't far from St. Freya Academy. This distance was nothing in the eyes of a top powerhouse who had lived for hundreds of years. There must be a special reason why she didn't save Lillian. "Why didn't you do it?" Seeing the young man staring at her like this, Istrid couldn't bear it. She pondered for a moment and said with tears in her eyes, "Child, I'm sorry about what happened to your sister. But due to special reasons, I can only do it once. I can't defeat Pulist outside the city. I only have a chance of winning in the city." "I see." After hearing the woman's explanation, Luo Ya's voice was unusually calm. The next moment, the black-haired young man reached into his pocket and a sparkling gem appeared in his hand. The moment the gem left the box, the faint sound of the wind blew past their ears like the whisper of death. The chaotic air mass began to flow faster, colliding with the gem and greedily seeking air from the outside world. Istrid widened her eyes and Luo Ya stated his condition. "Save her, Pulist. I'll kill him." Upon hearing Luo Ya's words, Istrid's pupils shrank abruptly, but the young man who was covered in cuts and bruises seemed unusually calm. Plist was indeed powerful, but in this chaotic Leinster, there was something he didn't know about yet that could defeat him, and that was the 6 calamities that the Saint Heroes Guild had prepared to kill him. The 6 calamities was a calamity that devoured everything and annihilated countless civilizations. Even the King of Curses who stood at the pinnacle of mankind could not escape the fate of the wind summoners who slaughtered countless long-lived species. Absorbing the egg required time and energy, but releasing this ancient monster to perish together with the enemy was more than enough for Luo Ya at any given moment. Istrid stared blankly at Luo Ya in front of her. She understood his intention, and the young man, who had turned his life into a bargaining chip, formally made his request. "If there's no other choice, I'm willing to take the King of Curses with me. But, please save Senior Lillian. Ancestor, please agree to my only request." Upon hearing Luo Ya's words, Estrid's expression kept changing. Her pupils met the young man's golden pupils and she could feel his unshakable determination. After struggling for a moment, the black-haired woman gradually calmed down and made her choice. "I understand. You are all brave children." The black-haired woman sighed and at the next moment, her body released a rainbow light. "She'll be fine, I promise." Leaving those words behind, Istrid vanished into thin air and headed to the battlefield. Success. Looking at the empty city wall after Istrid left, Luo Ya heaved a sigh of relief. He extended his trembling hand and gently wiped away the tears that still hung on his face. He suddenly felt a sense of peace that he had never felt before. Lillian won't die. Luo Ya felt that there was no better news in the world than this. But at the same time, intense anger and unyielding fighting spirit ignited in his heart. Although Luo Ya persuaded Istrid with the reason of perishing together, in fact, he didn't have such thoughts at all. Lillian took such a huge risk to save him and she didn't want him to die in this place. Besides, Luo Ya believed that there must be a way out of this situation. The historical fragment was a test, but it wasn't a dead end. Luo Ya had grasped the 2 most crucial keys and the rest was just information. He believed that when he completed the last piece of the puzzle, there would be a way to take revenge on Pulist. Chapter 310. The term future was a very broad term. It could mean the future like tomorrow, or it could also mean an abstract concept like the future. But when it was preceded by the word human, it would be exceptionally heavy. What exactly does the future of human refer to? With such questions echoing in his mind, his hazy consciousness gradually became clear. Everything that happened before he fainted flashed across his mind. When he woke up again, Luo Ya was already in a tidy bedroom. Blinking his eyes gently, the black-haired young man got up abruptly. "Where is this place?" Covering his body that was still in pain, Luo Ya observed the room he was in. He realized that this should be an unoccupied bedroom. There were no personal belongings, and everything was standard furniture. "Is this a temporary ward?" Such a thought flashed across his mind. But before Luo Ya could shout, a little elf emitting light suddenly descended from above. After circling around him, it flew towards the direction of the door. "Is it going to lead the way for me?" Understanding the elf's intention, Luo Ya got down from the bed and followed the elf's guidance out of the door. Realizing that there was no one in the corridor, He walked through the slightly gloomy building and soon arrived at the central hall. As the elf flew up, Luo Yue looked up and saw a figure floating above the hall. It was a black-haired woman in a long dress. She was also the one who Luo Yue asked for help last night. But unlike yesterday, Istrid seemed to be slightly exhausted. Perhaps sensing the young man's gaze, the black-haired woman opened her eyes and blinked in surprise. "Can you walk now? It seems that you've recovered well," the woman said as she descended from the sky. Luo Yue was stunned for a moment before he anxiously asked about the situation after he fainted. Istrid smiled faintly and slowly explained the aftermath of the battle last night. After Luo Yue fainted, Lillian was successfully rescued by Istrid, who rushed to the scene. Istrid and Plist met on the spot and fought on the spot. As a result, most of Leinster was now in ruins and both sides were recuperating. Originally, if we fought in the academy, I could use the dream realization enchantment to protect the nearby buildings. But this time, it was outside the range. Dream realization? Yes, that's the ability to materialize dreams. It can cover reality. No matter how much damage is done within the barrier, everything will return to normal after the barrier disappears. The wide-eyed Luo Yue finally understood why there were no traces of this battle at St. Freya Academy. Then the young man asked where Lillian was, and the answer was that the girl had fallen asleep after receiving treatment. After hearing the news, Luo Yue was finally relieved. Seeing the two so loving, Estrella smiled. However, to her surprise, Luo Yue didn't leave immediately. Instead, she asked her a key question. "Lord Ancestor, with your strength, what are you guarding here?" The black-haired young man looked at Istrid's question, his heart full of confusion. Since Istrid was able to fight with the Lord of Curses and retreat unscathed, she must be a powerhouse of the same level, which was a level 1 source-level powerhouse. What kind of thing was it that it needed a level 1 source-level powerhouse to protect it? In the face of Luo Yue's question, the rainbow-eyed beauty fell into silence. After hesitating for a long time, Estrella sighed and said, "I'm guarding the relic of the ancient three-race alliance, Dream of Chaos." Dream of Chaos? The three-race alliance? Yes, the three-race alliance was an alliance formed by angels, dragons, and highland elves to fight against the great beings who had gone mad in ancient times. Dream of Chaos is a dream creation born from the joint efforts of the three races. In fact, it has another name, Dream of the Savior. The Savior? Luo Yue, who heard the familiar word, asked in surprise. Estrella nodded and told the truth about guarding it for hundreds of years. The Savior was one of the great beings who surpassed the gods in ancient times. He once led a glorious era. However, just like the alternation of light and shadow, his fall caused countless catastrophes. The decline of many ancient races was greatly related to him. However, even if he fell into a deep sleep, the existence of the Savior still caused a huge problem. The Savior's deep sleep was not deep. He would unconsciously lead people to fall and increase his believers. Every few hundred years, he would appear in a state of near awakening. The duration of this state was long and short, and the intensity was different. However, every time, it would cause a bloody storm. The depraved and crazy murmurs echoed in the depths of the mind. The dragons tore at each other, and the angels drew their swords against each other. Even the Highland elves, who were the least affected, inevitably went crazy. In order to get rid of this once in a few hundred years nightmare, the three most powerful races at that time jointly created Dream of Chaos, and then handed it over to the Nightmare Demon to manage. The Nightmare Demon was one of the most peculiar races in Shi-Ya. It was also the only race that could resist the Savior other than the ancient King Selection race. This was because the Nightmare Demon was real at night and illusory during the day. In other words, any effect that was not their own would be reset after half a day. The high-level Nightmare Demon could hold on for half a day. When the sun rose, the depravity and madness would be eliminated. And as the Nightmare Demon's instinct allowed them to freely control the Dream of Chaos. And it turned out that the alliance of the three races and the Nightmare Demon had succeeded. Under the control of the Dream of Chaos, the Savior fell into an extremely long sleep. However, just like how bricks would turn into sand, with the passage of time and the change of era, the ancient races gradually withered. The dream of chaos that had lost its effect was also lost. But when time flowed to the human era, the savior had already ended his hibernation. Then, a huge disaster like history repeated itself, until the emergence of the Society of Sages in the Second Age. At the critical moment, the Ard family, the only family that still had a legacy, led the survivors of the various races to find the dream of chaos. But for that, they paid a great price. The first president of the Society of Sages, Lucen Ard, died because of it. The first generation of the Society of Sages was almost wiped out. However, when the family was at its weakest, the Ard family was hunted down by the believers of the Savior because of the dream of chaos. Chapter 3:11. In the empty hall, the black-haired woman forced herself to cheer up after recounting the sorrowful past of the Ackett family. Luo Ya also tried his best to wipe away the bitterness on his face. However, at the next moment, the young man's face froze when he saw the room that Istrid pointed at. What does she mean? Keep a child? Keep what child? Luo Ya stared blankly at the woman in front of him with his eyes wide open. He couldn't react for a moment, but Istrid didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. For a family with a long history like the Ard family, what they feared the most was the loss of their inheritance. What did inheritance require? Of course, it was the descendants. No matter how wonderful the inheritance method was, no matter how profound and powerful the inheritance power was, it was useless without descendants. Since ancient times, rare races and outstanding bloodlines had to ensure the survival of their descendants before going to the battlefield. This was the responsibility and obligation of the race and the family, especially for a family with a small population like the Ackett family. Although Istrid would try her best to avoid it, if there was no other choice, Luo Ya might perish together with Prist. At such a time, it was natural for him to keep a seed for the family. Ancestor, what are you talking about? Lillian is mine. I've asked the child. You have the same bloodline, but you're not related by blood. We're not related by blood, but when it comes to children, I don't have that kind of relationship with Senior. Luo Ya, who almost understood the situation, tried to evade the question with a stiff face. Istrid was stunned. The black-haired woman looked at the young man and blinked. She didn't expect that the two of them weren't lovers. In fact, Istrid always thought that the two of them called each other brother and sister because they liked each other, but it wasn't a big deal. Don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your relationship. It's much better than the soldiers on the front line during the war. Luo Ya and Lillian were willing to sacrifice themselves to save each other. Their feelings for each other were far beyond that of ordinary couples. In her opinion, it was enough. During the war, the two parties in the front line might not have met each other before. Istrid looked at the blushing Luo Ya. She had already guessed the situation of the teenager, but as an old virgin, Istrid had no experience to impart. She could only pat him on the shoulder and said, "Your Ackett family is the main branch of Ardre's family, so you must leave behind a descendant. But you don't have to be nervous, just tell her the truth. That child will agree." The truth? How should he tell the truth? Senior sister, can you help me give birth to a child? There's no way anyone would agree to this. Wait, if it's senior sister, perhaps. Hearing Istrid's words, Luo Ya suddenly panicked when she recalled the girl's love and care. Lillian might really agree, but the problem was that he didn't really want to die. Normally, there would not be an absolute deadlock in a historical episode. Luo Ya wanted to fight for his life, but he didn't want to die. And he found it strange. From Roy to Istrid, why did they all have something against Lillian's belly? Luo Ya had a headache when he thought of this, but then he recalled Istrid's attitude toward the Ekmen family. His feverish brain seemed to have been splashed with cold water. He deliberated for a moment and carefully said, Ancestor, there's something I want to tell you. Actually, senior sister Lillian is a member of the Ekmen family. Hearing Luo Ya's words, Istrid, who hated the Ekmen family to the core, frowned. But after a long silence, the black-haired woman sighed. 1,000 years have passed, and the grudges of the past have long been buried in the dust of history. These have nothing to do with that child. Compared to that, her love and care for you is real. Not many people in this world dare to stand in front of the Lord of Curses, let alone for others. Besides, if your child is born, what will his surname be? Hey, that should be Akut. Roher listened to this question with a strange look on his face. Istrid nodded her head seriously. That's it. You're Akut. After marrying you, she changed her surname to Akut. The child will still be Akut. What does that have to do with the Akmen family? How can that be? Chapter 3:12. Outside the door, Istrid prayed for the prosperity of her children and grandchildren. On the other side of the door, the black-haired young man held the bottle in his hand and didn't know what to do. After struggling for a long time, the young man braced himself and walked into the room. The room Lillian was in was similar to Luo Ya's room. It should be a temporary ward as there weren't any personal belongings in the room. The young man glanced at the clock on the wall and found that it was stopped just like the room he woke up in. Only the dream spirits were flying around in the room. Senior. Luo Ya called out softly but didn't get any response. He heaved a sigh of relief when he realized Lillian didn't seem to wake up. He strode into the room and the first thing he saw was the young lady sleeping on the bed. Her black hair was scattered, her delicate face was slightly pale due to blood loss, and her lips were lighter than usual. Her neck was snowy white, and her chest was moving up and down slightly. Lillian's temperament was completely different from usual. Just like that, Luo Ya was presented before him. The moment he saw Lillian sleeping soundly on the bed like a sleeping beauty, an unprecedented sense of peace rose in his heart. But at the same time, it made his throat hoarse and his eyes sour. Standing at the door and calming his emotions, Luo Ya slowly approached the bed. After thinking for a moment, he moved a chair and sat beside the bed like that night. But this time, he didn't dare to simply hold Lillian's hand. Looking at the small, jade-like hand, the image of Lillian breaking it to summon 10 cities, flashed across the black-haired young man's mind. Even though Istrid had healed her, Luo Ya still observed her hand for a long time. Gently covering Lillian's jade-like hand with both of his hands, Luo Ya let out a relieved sigh. However, what he didn't expect was that the sleeping young lady seemed to have sensed something and slowly opened her eyes. Luo Ya sobbed as he felt the warmth of the young lady's body and breathed in her faint fragrance. The black-haired young lady gently stroked the young man's head, but she was also crying tears of joy. After encountering the source-grade priest, although the two of them were covered in wounds, they had survived. This kind of ending could be described as a miracle. Luo Ya was very satisfied with this, and Lillian felt that this was the happiest moment in her life. The intense emotions caused their blood to resonate. Their bodies were pressed together as if they were one. Roher silently listened to the girl's heartbeat. He felt that it was the most pleasant sound in the world. The youth enjoyed this feeling and apologized to Istrid in his heart. Luo Ya's arrangements were undoubtedly perfect. The timing of Lillian's awakening was accurate and the potion to ensure success was prepared. But it was a pity that Luo Ya didn't have the desire to do so. After surviving a calamity, the love in their hearts was far greater than before. But it was also because of this that procreation seemed somewhat vulgar and inappropriate. When love filled one's heart, desire had to be put aside. Luo Ya finally understood why most people would choose to hug at this moment. It was because it could bring two hearts closer together. After hugging for a long time, Luo Ya's breathing gradually stabilized and Lillian's emotions calmed down. The black-haired young lady stroked the young man and broke the silence first. If we can go back, let's go out and live together for a while. Huh. The sudden request and topic made Roher slightly surprised. The boy looked up at the girl in front of him and blinked with some puzzlement. Senior sister, going out and living together means, if we live together, we won't be separated for a day. Luo Ya widened his eyes when he heard Lillian's answer. He immediately understood what the young lady meant and nodded almost reflexively. Before this incident, it was Lillian who felt uneasy about being separated from Luo Ya. But after meeting Priest and Lillian sacrificed herself to send him away, it was Luo Ya who felt uneasy and even traumatized. This time, senior sister, you'll have to keep your word. Of course. I can't bear to break my promise a second time. Lillian smiled as she said this. Luo Ya also smiled. After hugging for a while, the young lady finally had the energy to observe her surroundings. Not long after, her gaze naturally focused on one spot. Is that medicine for me? Chem? Medicine? The black-haired young man was stunned when he heard Lillian's words. He turned around and saw that the young lady was holding a medicine bottle in her hand. His eyes instantly widened. Wait. Senior sister, you can't drink that. That's for pregnancy. Cough, cough. Hey. For what? No, I mean. Chapter 3:13. The alluring aroma of tea lingered around his nose and the soft seat made him unwilling to get up. When Luo Ya opened his eyes again, he saw a dazzling array of refreshments and a witch holding a teacup across the table. However, unlike the previous 2 times, Altacia was much more obedient this time. She didn't tempt Luo Ya to do anything, nor did she make him appear in a strange place. She just greeted him with a faint smile in front of the peaceful tea table. Good evening, Sir Hero. Good evening. Looking at the night outside the window, Roher calmly greeted back and then picked up the cup and took a sip of tea. This was the 3rd time they met. Luo Ya's emotions were very stable. After experiencing various crises, the more urgent the situation was, the calmer the young man became. However, it was this unusual calmness that made the witch across the table puzzled. Altacia looked at the calm young man. After hesitating for a moment, she raised her eyes and carefully said, "What a surprise. I thought I would be scolded when I saw you this time." Why? Because the skill I gave you didn't take effect. Aren't you angry? Angry? Hearing Altacia's words, the black-haired young man paused for a moment and nodded slightly. Yes, but only to myself. Hey, yourself? Why? Looking at Altacia, who widened her eyes, Luo Ya put down the teacup and said calmly, "You are a witch. You are the representative of changes and incomprehensible. Treating the skill you gave me as a life-saving straw is absurd. Moreover, that skill isn't an autonomous ability but similar to a summoning. Therefore, the summoned person expressing rejection is also one of the possible outcomes. After all, that is your right. In the end, you have never said that you are my companion." Luo Ya raised his eyes and looked coldly at the white-haired witch. Seeing this, Altacia pursed her lips and showed a wronged expression. "Sir Hero, are you treating me as an enemy? No, it's not hostility. It's just distrust. Or rather, jumping out of a fixed way of thinking. I was indeed too lazy before." The black-haired youth sighed as he recalled Prista's evaluation of him. After experiencing the crisis of the 2 historical fragments, although Luo Ya still believed that the danger of the historical fragments should be taken seriously, in fact, he had unknowingly started to look down on them, which was the arrogance in Pulist's eyes. It was inevitable that he would encounter ancient existences in the historical fragments, but would these ancient gods help him? No one could guarantee such a thing. This was especially true for the Witch Queen, Altacia. She wasn't a match for Luo Ya in the first place. Plus, witches were known to be capricious, so it was only natural that something would happen at such a special moment. Ever since I resonated with Senior Lillian and learned that she also had the bloodline of the Ackett family, I developed a sense of dependence on her and lost my sense of nervousness. I subconsciously wanted to share my burdens with her, which resulted in Senior Lillian almost dying to save me. You didn't appear at that time, which could be said to have shattered the illusion in my heart and allowed me to regain my footing. From this perspective, I should be thanking you. Luo Ya gazed at the white-haired woman in front of him. His golden pupils didn't contain any deceit. Upon hearing his words, Altacia was stunned. After a long while, The Witch Queen's body gradually trembled. Then, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. Hee hee, ha ha ha. As expected, we really get along well. Sir Hero, you're right. A sense of dependence is indeed a contradiction with the trials of your family. But I didn't do it on purpose. That's the only thing I hope you can understand me about. Altacia isn't such a bad witch. I didn't appear because summoning me in your state back then wouldn't solve the problem. Instead, it would cause your deaths. The white-haired Witch Queen stroked her cheeks and gazed at the young man opposite her with narrowed eyes. I really like Sir Hero. That's the only thing I hope you don't doubt. Like. Are you referring to the pain and lamentation when I'm at the center of the contradiction? Aya, don't ask that. Isn't it like you're asking me to tell you what I like about Sir Hero? You're so mean. Altacia held her cheeks and said shyly. But at the next moment, she revealed a joyful smile. Although I like those two, I still hope that Sir Hero can defeat them. After all, isn't that the contradiction in your family? No matter if it's the inner conflict and hesitation, or the external conflicts and dangers, they are like curses that will always accompany you. And Sir Hero is a typical example. Chapter 314. After meeting the unpredictable witch and obtaining the important ability to face Pulist directly instead of being instantly killed, Luo Ya woke up from his dream again. He rubbed his eyes and looked at Lillian, who was still sleeping soundly. Before he was fully awake, he heard a soft knock on the door. The young man was slightly taken aback. He slowly let go of Lillian's hand and came to the door. After opening the door, he saw a familiar young man standing outside. Brother Antonio? Luo Ya was a little surprised to see Antonio knocking on the door. The young man didn't have any objection to Luo Ya's intimate address. He nodded at Luo Ya, who was still quite energetic. He didn't expect the young man who was seriously injured and dying last night to recover so well. It had been more than 3 hours since he entered the dream. Not only did he not look tired, but he also looked refreshed as if he had drunk some medicine. Is it over? Hey. Yes, it's over. Well, let's go. Let's discuss the battle plan. Antonio said and led Luo Ya back to the hall where Istrid was. At this time, the Queen of Dreams was floating in the air under the colorful glass of the hall just like before when she talked to Luo Ya. Her eyes were closed and there was a sacred and dreamy beauty to her. Ancestor, this is the center of the dream enchantment. Lady Istrid has returned to the dream to rest. This body is a fake body, but it is still very valuable, so it is necessary to guard and maintain it. Antonio explained and looked at the figure above with eyes full of tenderness. Luo Ya's heart skipped a beat. He thought for a moment and asked tentatively, Brother Antonio, you seem to have a good relationship with Ancestor. Have you known each other for a long time? Yes. Although I'm a soldier now, I'm actually a graduate of St. Freya Academy. Lady Istrid is my mentor and also the person who recommended me to the Twilight Sage Association. We've known each other for more than 10 years. I see. Then, as a graduate of St. Freya Academy, you stayed in Leinster to protect and assist the scholar, which is Lady Estrid's job. So that's how it is. Is that why it's called a guardian? But looking at you, Dean, why do I feel that something isn't right? The black-haired youth looked at Antonio's affectionate eyes and had some vague guesses in his heart. If he remembered correctly, Antonio had never married in his life. In the history without the interference of Luo Ya and the others, Antonio had personally experienced this incident 400 years ago and successfully survived. But Estrella had disappeared since then. Not long after, the Twilight Sage would fall apart, and no trace of her could be found in Roy's era. But in that case, why didn't Antonio tell him anything when he was investigating the scholar? Is it for some special reason, or is it because he doesn't even trust Roy after the collapse of the Sage Society? Luo Ya was puzzled, but he didn't expect to get the answer soon. Although it's not right to say this, it's really good that you can come this time. It may not seem like much to you, but Lady Istrid is very happy to see you. Hearing Antonio's words, Luo Ya widened his eyes slightly. The young man smiled. In fact, before you came, I had some prejudice against your family. After all, you haven't sent anyone to visit teacher in the past few hundred years. But now, it seems that you have your own difficulties. Looking at the two people being chased by the Curse King, Antonio said and sighed. Luo Ya was slightly taken aback. He recalled the happy look of the rainbow ancestor when she looked at him and suddenly felt heavy in his heart. Even with the dream demon bloodline, Estrid's thoughts were still human, and it was obvious that she valued her family and kinship very much. Letting her guard the dream of chaos alone, not seeing her family for hundreds of years, and even directly forgetting her existence, this kind of behavior couldn't be described as excessive. It was no wonder that Antonio was indignant about it. But, as the saying goes, there are gains and losses. The main reason why Istrid was able to hide until now was that she had cut off contact with the Acate family. In fact, when the eyes of the dark were focused on the Acate family, Istrid was the safest. I've heard about your plan, but unfortunately, Lady Istrid doesn't want to sacrifice you like this, so we will still fight Pulist next. Although you were defeated last night, your efforts weren't in vain. The current Pulist is probably the weakest he has ever been. Antonio said and patted the young man's shoulder encouragingly. Luo Ya smiled. According to Estrid's speculation, the Curse King should have fallen because his strength had been declining due to his age in the past few decades. Although Luo Ya and Lillian were defeated last night, they did indeed force Pulist to fight with all his might. Powerful strength comes with a corresponding price. This was the law of this world, and even the powerful Curse King couldn't ignore it. Besides, the battle last night wasn't just the first battle between Luo Ya and Lillian. There was also the second battle where Istrid showed up. In the morning, the ancestor was exhausted, so Pulist's condition would only be worse after fighting multiple battles. Chapter 315. When the sun set, Leinster City, which had been reduced to ruins within a day, also ushered in its own dusk, as if heralding the end of the city. After the initial exodus of residents and the continuous battles and massacres, the entire city, except for the inner city, had turned into a ghost town. The Saint Heroes Society was exterminated as expected by the higher-ups, and the Brotherhood of Redemption had also suffered a great loss. The chaotic streets were littered with corpses, and the stench of blood and decay filled the nostrils, making people nauseous. Occasionally, there would be some survivors who had survived the turmoil, but even these determined and courageous people could not hold on any longer. Under the setting sun, they were either in despair or had gone mad. As the night breeze blew, a layer of eerie blood scent floated out of the city. The darkness that wriggled in the remaining buildings began to release innumerable kin. The black-armored soldiers were prepared to begin today's pilgrimage under the leadership of the clergy. This was a city that had already fallen into despair, but it was also a city that still had some hope. On top of the walls of the inner city, countless warriors and students looked at the swaying darkness in the shadows with pale faces. However, even if their bodies were trembling, they did not flee. That was because in the academy behind them, a small number of teachers were organizing refugees under the lead of the elves into the misty forest to seek refuge. Many of the residents who ran into the forest were their relatives. Pregnant women and children who were still ignorant of the world were all behind them. When the waves of destruction swept over, as the elite warriors of this era, compared to running away in panic, they wanted to leave behind a blurry back view that they were holding on to something for the future generations rather than running away in panic. Protection and sacrifice, despair and hope, this was the theme of this era. When this theme played in their ears, the warriors might still not be able to face death with equanimity, but even if they were trembling with fear, they would never lack the courage to look it in the eye. Because there were too many things that needed to be defended with their lives. Under the dusk, Antonio looked at the palace where Estrella was. Various emotions flashed across his eyes. The feelings that had existed since he was a teenager surged in his heart after many years of precipitation, and finally turned into a fearless chuckle. Pullis was still wearing his black robe. His skinny body seemed to be hidden in the darkness. But compared to yesterday, the Cursemancer King, who was walking among the monsters, didn't look good today. The strange green light illuminated half of his face. His green pupils were hidden in his eye sockets. His expression was no longer as gentle as it used to be. Only coldness remained. Looking at Pulis now, even the most ignorant people had already known his choice. And the old man did not care about it. After all, for him, everyone in the city would turn into unspeakable corpses in the future. It did not matter if he knew the truth in advance. The pale green light flickered in the wind. Following the light was a hazy mist. As the burning light flickered, more and more figures emerged from the mist. It was as if the black-armored soldiers from the other side had walked out of the mist silently. Sensing the presence of the oil lamp, the scattered soldiers and clergy in the city seemed to have found the direction and began to gather. Looking down from the city wall, there was already a wriggling darkness around Pulis. Faint whispers came with the wind, and the warriors on the city wall frowned. Amidst the blasphemous chanting, the old man in the black robe gently raised the oil lamp and beat the war drum. There were no flags fluttering, no horns sounding. The dark sea rushed towards the inner city under the guidance of the light. Hundreds and thousands of warriors on the city wall responded. Ready, fire! Amidst the shouts, under the last rays of the sunset, the defenders drew their bows and narked their arrows in unison. A cloud-like rain of arrows enveloped the enemy. There was almost no suspense in the outcome. Amidst the rain of arrows, a large number of monsters fell like wheat being cut down. The arrows shot by the extraordinaires easily penetrated the armor of the black-armored soldiers and pierced through their hearts. With the remaining force, they fell to the ground and kicked up a cloud of dust. The defense of the black clergy was even weaker. Their heads directly exploded under the attack of the small missiles like arrows. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere. The first round of attacks by the defenders had achieved significant results. That was no doubt inspiring. At the same time, it also exposed the biggest weakness of the monsters, which was the lack of long-range attacks. Other than the black-robed clergy who could shoot out chaos curses, most of the ordinary black-armored soldiers did not have any long-range attacks. Having fallen into madness and lost their intelligence, they naturally did not have any tactics to speak of. The defenders returned fire with their bows and arrows. The students of the academy cast long-range curses together. Amidst the fluctuation of the curses, the sky seemed to be boiling. Rolling magma fell from the sky, and the rain of fire sprayed over the vast area outside the barrier. Any monster that came into contact with the fire would be turned into a blazing ball of fire. However, even with such a large scale of damage, it was still a little powerless in the face of the endless number of soldiers. Thousands of black-armored soldiers fell under the arrows. The tenacious individuals struggled in the blazing fire. However, the monsters behind them continued to surge forward calmly. As time passed, the inventory of arrows was constantly depleted. The faces of the students who cast the curses also turned pale. The heavy breathing on the city wall was getting louder and louder. However, the disgusting murmurs were getting closer and louder. However, in the face of such an unfavorable situation, the exhausted warriors did not despair. Instead, they looked at their commander in anticipation. Under everyone's gaze, Antonio's body did not move at all. It was only when the blasphemous whispers began to become unbearable that the young man calmly gave his order. The structure of the monster's armor was clearly visible to the eyes. Activate, crossblade light. Cover the area vertically. Fire the flare. Flare. Amidst the shouts of the soldiers, the curse-powered flare on the city wall rose into the sky one after another. For a moment, the city of Leinster was as bright as day. Along with the order to activate, the sound of the defense machinery operating rumbled. The magic elements inside the colorful stones that looked like decorations began to rapidly activate. Under the stimulation of the curses, the colorful killing lights flickered in the stones and gradually turned into a shining cross. Fire! Amidst the shouting of the order, hundreds of cross lights erupted at the same time. The vibration of the volley forced the soldiers on the city wall to support each other. The light of destruction began to spread out from the bottom of the city wall. The torrent of magic elements plowed the ground like a knife and quickly spread out into the distance. The dazzling torrent then rushed into the Black Sea. Countless monsters were cut in half before they could even react. The foul smell of blood continued to explode and spread, and the vast battlefield was filled with crimson marks that looked like the claw marks of a giant beast. Under the power of the fortress curse vessel, Crossblade Aura, the outside of St. Freya Academy was almost raised by a layer. The scene of corpses everywhere was probably unsightly in normal times, but now it was a blessing for all human warriors. Oh dash! After a long time of forbearance, the warriors who used the curse vessel to inflict a lot of damage to the enemy raised their swords and cheered. The students also showed excited smiles, but Antonio's cheeks looked grim under the light of the fire. From the beginning of the battle, he knew that the outcome of this war did not depend on these black monsters. The young man's gaze was not only on the battlefield, but also on the old man holding an oil lamp in the distance. The battlefield now seemed fierce, but before Priest made his move, it was no different from before the battle began. Chapter 3:16. In the war, the people's will of unity was naturally commendable. Their determination to risk their lives was equally moving, but everyone had to admit one thing. Some objective existences were difficult to contend with or change by people's subjective will, such as the gap in strength. Boom! Violent thunder exploded in Leinster City for the umpteenth time. The torrent of curse power continued to wash forward like water as if it would never end. The old man with the lantern stood still, but the soldiers and students on the city wall had to retreat in a panic. Antonio, who was at the front of the crowd, looked exhausted. Sensing that the intensity of the white thunderbolts had not changed at all, as if there was no end to them, the young man understood the black-robed old man's intention. Priest was conserving his strength. Facing Antonio, he did not burst out like last night. Instead, he had been maintaining the level of a full-force attack of source rank level 2, constantly attacking. But even so, Antonio was overwhelmed after a long confrontation. After everyone on the city wall evacuated, the solidified space shield finally dissipated. The moment Antonio left, the explosive thunder destroyed the towering high wall, and the collapsed tower rushed into the city with the turbulence. The people's resistance did not stop the steps of the Lord of Curses after all. In the chaotic whispers, the Redemption Legion gathered here began to march toward the broken city gate. They crossed the gap in the city wall to pursue the retreating soldiers and students. Bursts of strange voices came, but the crazy murmurs were offset by the special effect of the dream enchantment. In Estrid's enchantment, people barely gained the ability to resist the murmurs, but even so, they could only fight in close combat for a short time. The retreating soldiers retreated to the second city wall and organized resistance again, but the effect was very limited. Without the strong fortifications and the powerful curse vessel system, the defenders were no longer able to resist the black-armored soldiers that swarmed in. The city walls fell one after another. At midnight, the monsters from hell finally broke through the last barrier and rushed into the college. Behind the innumerable monsters, Priest returned to the academy that was nominally under his charge with an oil lamp in hand. There was a smile on his aged face, and his pace was steady, neither fast nor slow, just like a returning king or a general returning victorious. The moment Priest entered the dream enchantment, a familiar feeling suddenly surged in his heart. But before he could think about it, a violent fluctuation of curse power came from the sky. In the hall where Istrid was, colorful rainbows soared into the sky. Countless dream elves glowed. The colorful aurora lit up the sky and then shone toward the intruders. The old man under the aurora remained unmoved. He cut open his finger and used his bloodline ability. The miracle tree and the grassland glowing appeared again. The Lord of Curses, who was also protected by the elves, was unscathed by Estrid's killer move. Boring trick. Priest looked at the end of the aurora in the distance and curled up the corner of his mouth. The more Istrid prepared, the more it meant that she was unable to break free from the dream. Although the combined attack of the elves was powerful, it was far from being able to hurt him. The 100-year wait was finally coming to an end. The Lord of Curses stepped forward again. The ghostly green lamp was surrounded by white fog. The old man who walked out of the fog was like the Grim Reaper, bringing destruction to everyone with him. But the moment he stepped into the nighttime college that was only left with a few lights, Priest's movement paused. A feeling of stagnation and pressure on the heart suddenly appeared in the old man's body. It was the instinctive sense of danger of the Lord of Curses who had experienced countless battles over the years. Its appearance could only mean one thing, and that was the arrival of a crisis. Priest's pupils shrunk in an instant. The next moment, the old man, who seemed to have sensed something, turned his head abruptly. His eyes, which had seen the vicissitudes of life, pierced through the obstacles like an eagle and landed on the top of the clock tower in the moonlit night. It was a figure with an illusory beauty like an elf that no longer existed in this world. The figure was wearing a dark coat, and his body was slightly thin. His skin was slightly pale due to blood loss, and his shoulder-length hair was fluttering in the night wind. His cold and majestic gaze looked down. The moonlight attached to his body, dyeing it with brilliance like a guardian. The moment he saw the familiar yet strange figure, Priest's eyes widened abruptly. The Lord of Curses naturally would not lose his composure because of the change in his enemy's appearance. What really made him feel strange was Luo Ya's eyes. It was a pair of eyes that was calm and vicissitudes, as if it had experienced countless years and seen the prosperity and decline of the world. The bright color in the golden eyes seemed to have been erased by time, leaving only the dim color of dusk. The moment Priest looked into Luo Ya's eyes, he even had the illusion that he was looking directly at an ancient existence. Something was not right. Almost instinctively, Priest's curses began to churn in his body. Luo Ya, who was staring at him, did not move or have any killing intent, but it was precisely because of that made Priest's hair stand on end. "What did you do?" The old man furrowed his brows and questioned. However, he did not expect an answer at all. Vigilant in his heart, Prista simply raised his hand. The radiance of spells shone like stars that fell to the ground in the dark night. The intense radiance rushed towards the figure on top of the tower along with his words. Everything before him turned into white light just like last night. The familiar scene made the black-haired young man's eyes flicker slightly. But now, he was no longer the same as before. The moment before the radiance reached him, a dusk-colored airflow suddenly burst out of the youth's body. The turbid airflow instantly covered heaven and earth, spreading in all directions. The dusk-colored hurricane firmly withstood Priest's attack, and then turned it into nothingness as if wiping away dust. However, that was not the end. As the night wind blew, the sound of the wind was heard. Almost in an instant, the entire St. Freya Academy seemed to have fallen into another world. It was a dusk-colored airflow that filled the surroundings as if it was the end of the world. The ear-piercing sound of the wind mixed with the sound of rolling sand echoed in the air. The call of death filled the surroundings as if it was right beside one's ears. The old man in the black robe looked at the scene in front of him and frowned in surprise. However, he did not unleash his curses like he did when he faced the freezing air of the frozen earth. Because unlike the freezing air before, the dusk-colored airflow did not attack in a straight line but was everywhere. "I see. I didn't expect you to have obtained a new power." The old man in the black robe's face gradually turned gloomy in the sandstorm. Thick curses began to accumulate in his body. In just a short day, Luo Ya had undergone such a huge change. This situation surprised him and at the same time, it also aroused the murderous intent in Priest's heart. As expected, this family member must be dealt with, or else there would be endless trouble in the future. Fortunately, everything was not too late. Chapter 317. In the sky, the mist of dusk seemed to have sensed the will of its master and began to gather together. Thick waves of curse power gathered into countless tornadoes and turned into the spear of chaos as the black-haired boy moved. It was an invincible blade that could erode and shatter anything in its path. It was an unstoppable wind of destruction. When the power of the heavens descended, the surrounding space seemed to have solidified. Countless wind blades whistled towards Prista as if they were responding to each other. Facing the attack from the 6 calamities, that was difficult to defend against, Prista's skinny body seemed to have returned to his prime under the replenishment of curse power. He raised his long staff, and countless elves flashed around him. The galaxy seemed to have reversed at this moment, and the white light that devoured everything reappeared in the world. A fierce battle took place in St. Freya Academy. The curse power that devoured each other collided with each other. Luo Ya, who had the help of the witch's blood and Lillian, could feel that he was stronger than ever. The abundant curse power supported him, and it was even stronger than when he received Pei Taylor's blessing. The golden pupils of the boy floating in the sky lit up like candlelight amidst the vibrations of the source form. He reached out his palm, and the crown stone that he released with all his might seemed to have released an ancient monster into the world. In the haze, a vague figure appeared in the sky. It was a giant whose face could not be seen clearly, and it was also the one who summoned the dead in the ancient records. The moment he saw the yellow figure in the sky, Prista's eyes lit up. He finally understood what Luo Ya was relying on. Is this the basis for your arrogant words? The legendary monster that destroyed many ancient civilizations, one of the messengers of the mother goddess, the wind summoner. That is indeed a synonym for terror. Prista looked up at the giant monster that was formed by the endless wind and said so. He then looked down at the boy in front of him. The power of the crown stone, as well as your miraculous spell that allowed you to stack the power of those with the same bloodline to surpass the 3rd level of source rank, is indeed beyond my expectations. But who gave you the misconception that reaching the 3rd level of source rank can threaten me? Origin rank 3. You're only qualified to stand in front of me. The old man's voice thundered as he raised his staff. White radiance burst forth, dispersing the innumerable wind blades before they could reach him. The wind spears that converged into tornadoes in the sky also crumbled. Plist, displaying his full destructive power, stared straight at the blurry silhouette in the sky with shining eyes, fearless like a king. That's right. Even if he had fallen and lost his glory, Priest's power as the king of the human race still hadn't changed at all. They were the wealth that the old man had accumulated over countless years, the experience he had accumulated through countless life-and-death battles. These were things that others couldn't take away no matter what method they used. No matter how similar it is, this isn't the monster's real body. Although I don't know how you managed to block my attack with this turbid wind, it's meaningless if you can't hurt me. The black-robed old man looked at Luo Ya and shook his head, as if he had already seen the outcome of this battle of attrition. However, the youth with long black hair fluttering in the wind didn't seem to care. Unable to cause any damage, was that really the case? Haven't you noticed, Priestly? What? My wind didn't block your attack. It faded away because it should have faded away. The black-haired youth calmly told the truth. The King of Curses furrowed his brows visibly as if he had caught on to some important information. Luo Ya didn't mind the old man's reaction. He extended his hand and a swirling airflow condensed in his palm. Gazing at the airflow that carried the howling of the wind, the black-haired youth spoke calmly. Priestly, you said that I'm arrogant, but aren't you the same? Since ancient times, how many civilizations have collapsed in front of the wind summoners? Countless mythical creatures with supernatural powers far superior to humans couldn't escape their misfortune. You are indeed powerful, but why do you think you're an exception? The continuous questioning echoed in the old man's ears. But before Priestly could speak, an unprecedented weakness suddenly appeared in his body. Clang! As the lantern fell to the ground, the King of Curses widened his eyes due to his blurred vision. He looked at his arm in disbelief and realized that his well-maintained arms were now covered in wrinkles and withered like tree bark. This is. In front of the wind summoners, everything is equal because what they blow away is time. The black-haired youth calmly revealed the answer. On the opposite side, the old man's expression changed drastically. He finally understood why the curses couldn't reach Luo Ya. Under the erosion of time, even a powerful attack that could destroy the 10 cities would vanish due to the overflow of magic elements. This was an unchangeable law. Priestly, you've lost. You've lost to our race. Looking down at the old man who was rapidly weakening on the ground, Luo Ya calmly said those words without any doubt. However, Those words of victory froze the King of Curse's body and aroused his endless rage. I've lost. Heh, you're the first one who dares to say that in front of me. I see. So this is the 6 calamities. It's indeed an almost unstoppable power. But I've said it before. Any level 3 source rank skill is not unbreakable in front of me. You're not a real wind summoner. There is a limit to this dusk-colored space after all. It's within this dream enchantment, right? Then we just have to destroy this enchantment. The King of Curses, whose body was rapidly aging, roared. At this critical moment, his countless experiences of surviving from the jaws of death allowed him to quickly make a decision. An unimaginably large amount of curse power erupted from his body without reservation, followed by a violent tremor. Chapter 3:18. In the shattered sky, a blinding rainbow light erupted. Pulist swung his staff to block it, but it was too late. The moment the white radiance collided with the aurora, a massive shockwave swept across the ground. The King of Curses, who was already old and weak, and after experiencing the aging of the twilight wind, blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth for the first time. But even so, he still managed to stand firm on his feet. The black-robed old man lifted his head and looked at the shattered sky and the black-haired young man. He finally understood why he felt a strange presence when he stepped into the enchantment. But after a moment, the old man shook his head at Luoya. I see. You're using the aging wind to force me to break the enchantment. Hehe, it's indeed a perfect plan. I have no other choice. But, kid, do you think you've succeeded? Pleist's eyes, which had regained their brilliance, stared at the dream rift that was gradually recovering. His laughter was mixed with anger as he hissed. No, she can't return from the dream at this level. I'm afraid that strike just now is her limit. But it's useless. She can't kill me. The King of Curses roared as he tapped his staff on the ground. Instantly, 3 shadows appeared beside his feet. Then, his body glowed once again, dispersing the twilight wind that surrounded him. This is an ancient curse passed down from the ancient Shadow Kingdom. Other than the ability of the Wind Summoner, there is no other way to kill me without triggering it. I still have 3 chances, and I'm afraid your price is about to come. That's true. The black-haired young man, whose spell power was almost exhausted in the fierce battle, nodded. But there wasn't any despair on his face that the old man wanted to see. Luoya gazed at Pulist and repeated his words with a smile. There's still one more person in our race. The moment Luoya's voice fell, the black-haired young lady suddenly appeared beside the young man. Lillian, who rushed over from afar, gazed at the old man before her and extended her hand to the young man. Their interlocked hands acted as a bridge. In just a few moments, an intense resonance appeared between them. At the same time, a drop of blood wrapped in a rainbow radiance appeared before Lillian. The young lady opened her mouth and swallowed it without hesitation. That was the ancestor's blood that Istrid sent through the dream under the path opened by a terrifying enemy. It was also the blood of the nightmare, the most difficult creature to influence in this world. Using it as a medium, a miracle that only lasted for one night was born. Translucent wings extended from her back, and her small ears became slightly sharp. Her already beautiful face exuded a dreamlike charm as her aura changed. Under the colorful light and with her blood as the medium, Lillian temporarily transformed into a dream demon. This was a miracle that priest surpassed himself in a moment of crisis. He used the body of the king of the human race as a medium and combined it with the sacred divine tree. When it was completed, the shadows of the 12 ancient gods on the altar blessed him, and the sacred sword shone with endless brilliance. He could win. Chapter 3:19. Under the night sky, thick smoke billowed out of the burnt paradise. The grasslands and divine trees were ablaze, the elves were fleeing in all directions, and the shadows of the gods were dissipating in the steaming heat. The black-robed old man's body could no longer be seen, and only sporadic screams could be heard echoing in the night sky. The towering divine tree had turned into a gigantic torch, its flame illuminating the land and sky. The retreating soldiers and students in the distance stared blankly at the burning miracle, while the monsters in the city also wandered away in fear of the presence of the divine flame. Looking at the first flames of karmic retribution, the black-haired young man was speechless. He knew that everything was over. The powerful human king who had committed numerous crimes had disappeared in the flames of the fallen gods. Even if there was an ancient spell that could resurrect him, it was useless. Under the flames that would never be extinguished until they were burned, resurrection would only prolong the pain. It was the grave of a fallen king, and also the end of an era. Priest's ending was lamentable, but what made Luo ponder the most was the moment when he faced the immense pressure of Altacia and went beyond the limits of self-forging the divine sword. At that time, Priest who had triggered the ancient gods on the altar temporarily regained his youth, which meant that his bloodline ability seemed to have a greater possibility other than allowing him to live longer. It was not impossible for a withered tree to be rejuvenated, but he who cherished his life and feared death probably did not face death again after reaching Source Tier 1. Priest who enjoyed peace, hated aging to the point that he did not hesitate to fall and betray the entire human race, probably did not expect that the thing he gave up everything to pursue was actually in his body. It was just that without the struggle under extreme pressure, he did not have the final possibility to unlock his bloodline. If Priest had been on the front lines and sacrificed himself for the sake of the survival of humanity, he would probably have become another hero's story now. However, the wise old man did not learn some simple things: responsibility and obligation, dedication and sacrifice. These were words that had no fate with Priest, and also destined his ending. The black-haired young man sighed inwardly as he stared at the flames of karmic retribution. However, the white-haired witch beside him was frowning unhappily. For Altacia, who had not returned to the world for a long time, her opponent had died a little too quickly. If you weren't in such a hurry to attack me, you could have played a little longer. Most of the disobedient are really stupid. The Witch Queen sighed in boredom. Even if Luo was close to death, this fierce battle was nothing more than a game in Altacia's eyes. From the moment she appeared, the outcome was already decided. However, it's really wonderful. Is this the bloodline of the Akate family? Altacia lowered her head and looked at her own hands. Then, she gently clenched her fists and experienced the wonderful feeling that was completely different from her own body. The witch narrowed her eyes in enjoyment. What a rare experience. However, because the origin substance is different, it should be quite different from Sir Hero's orthodox method. Unfortunately, I can only experience it for one night. The white-haired witch stroked her cheek as she spoke. Upon hearing this, Luo turned his head to look at Altacia. After a long time, he could not help but ask, "Aren't you angry?" The black-haired young man looked at the Witch Queen. Although through a series of schemes, Luo successfully forced Pulis to break Estrella's dream and obtained the blood of the ancestor, and used it as a medium to temporarily turn Lillian into a nightmare, making it impossible for the witch to stay behind. However, due to her promise, Luo was not optimistic about Altacia's personal feelings. After all, strictly speaking, the witch was deceived by him. And this deception did not start from this battle, but even earlier, when Luo saw her for the last time. When Luo discovered that all the clocks in the dream barrier had paused and the dim campus scene was exceptionally familiar, he understood that the dream barrier was related to the dream guided by the Black Rose Ring. After meeting Estrella again, he was completely sure that the two were of the same origin. The meeting between Luo and Altacia before the battle was actually all part of his plan. To a certain extent, it was a kind of acting, but he did not expect the witch to make an agreement with him. Under the illumination of the fire, Luo quietly waited for the witch's anger, but to his surprise, Altacia did not get angry. The white-haired witch blinked and tapped her lips with her finger. "Indeed, my plan failed, but I'm not angry. Like I said, although I like the contradictions and entanglements in your heart, I like the way you look when you defeat them even more. But it's really beyond my expectations. I didn't expect you to use this method to break my deadlock. You made me so excited that I spilled my tea. Altacia smiled happily. The next moment, she suddenly took a step forward and pressed herself against the young man's chest. She looked at Luo Yue, who was pushed back by something inexplicably soft. She narrowed her eyes and whispered seductively. At that time, Altacia was really contradictory. She knew it was a trick, but she had to go because of the constraints of the agreement. She actually used this method to torture me. Sir Hero is really evil. However, it's really interesting, so this time, I'll treat it as a reward for Sir Hero. The Witch Queen smiled and pointed her finger at Luo Yue's chest. The black-haired young man was silent for a moment before smiling. Thank you so much. Then, after the lady, let me fulfill the agreement. Luo Yue said and took a step back, then smiled and stretched out his hand. The witch who saw his action was stunned for a moment and realized something. Contract. Yes, although that world is gorgeous, it's too boring for you. Indeed, and after Sir Hero used Altacia violently, she can't leave. Chapter 320. Under the radiance of the morning sun, Istrid heaved a sigh of relief as she gazed at the fallen tree that had turned into ashes. On the other hand, Lillian widened her eyes and blushed. Pregnant. Wife. Ancestor, what are you talking about? Of course, it's between you two. It's fine. You don't have to be shy. I know. Between us. Sigh, Lillian, you have to understand. We didn't have this plan when he came to find you. Luo Yue's situation was really dangerous at that time and the Akut family might really have no descendants. But don't worry. Although he did it as a precaution, he definitely has feelings for you. I can see that. The black-haired woman revealed an I understand expression and didn't mention that she was the one who instigated it. The intelligent young lady gradually guessed the truth from Estrid's words. Wait, could it be that when Luo Yue came to visit me, he wanted to? Lillian, who thought of something, looked at the young man who was talking to Antonio in disbelief. Her brain began to heat up rapidly. Istrid smiled, held Lillian's hand, and comforted her under the young lady's dazed gaze. You two will reach this step sooner or later. It's just that this matter sped things up a little. It's nothing. No, I am just a brother and sister. Didn't you guys kiss so passionately just now? Estrid's rhetorical question turned into an arrow that shot straight into Lillian's heart. The young lady's cheeks blushed and her lips trembled, but she couldn't utter a word. The woman with rainbow-colored eyes revealed a smile of an elder. Isn't it great? After all, you two are only related by blood. Although it's a fated connection, it's incomprehensible for people who haven't experienced this feeling. Only after marriage will they treat you two as a family. Lillian, whose brain was burning with shame, regained her senses after hearing Estrid's words. She looked at the ancestor beside her and suddenly fell into deep thought. Indeed, blood relatives were probably just an incomprehensible coincidence in the eyes of outsiders. In other words, I must form an intimate relationship with Luo Yue that outsiders can understand. But marriage? What if we don't get married? Not getting married? What are you talking about? Looking at Lillian, who seemed to be troubled by something, Istrid blinked and couldn't help but frown. If you don't get married, what about the child? No, that's why there are no children. Even without the child, do you think your relationship can last long if you don't get married? The black-haired girl widened her purple eyes upon hearing Estrid's words. The woman with rainbow eyes held her forehead helplessly. You're obviously very smart, so why would you make such a mistake? If that kid really marries someone else, what will you do? Of course I am. Wait, halfway through her words, the girl's purple eyes narrowed slightly. She immediately thought of a fatal problem. She might be able to treat Luo Yue as a family member in her heart, and she could also say that to others, but the problem was, would others believe her? If Luo Yue really got married, what would his wife think? Would anyone in this world allow their other half to have a sister who wasn't related by blood but was close to them? Without a doubt, the answer to this question was no. When the time came, the most likely ending for the two would be to gradually separate and not contact each other for many years. In the end, they would be strangers. The girl who discovered the truth fell into a daze for a moment, but at the same time, she also felt a strong sense of anxiety. It was a feeling that was absolutely unacceptable, and also an inexplicable resistance to the fact that the young man might have a loved one in the future. Looking at Lillian, whose expression changed constantly, Istrid pondered for a long time before asking with a serious expression, "And it's not just him. And it's not just his problem. Do you really think so yourself? What? Is the feeling in your heart really just the kinship of an elder sister? Or are you actually trying to fill up or avoid something, so you forcefully categorize this feeling as kinship?" Chapter 321. Under the night sky of St. Freya Academy, outside the cellar in the mountains, Paul Ackman was thinking about a serious question, and that was, a young man and a young woman, spending 2 hours alone in an isolated space at night, what would they usually do? This question could be said to be quite complicated. In Luo Ya's previous life, there were many different opinions. After all, people had different relationships, different thoughts, and different perspectives when looking at problems. Some people fought together for the survival of mankind in such an environment, while some just played Fight the Landlord for the night. Fortunately, YA didn't have a game like Fight the Landlord, and the aristocrats also needed an elegant environment to play chess. These unreliable possibilities were naturally ruled out by Paul, so the remaining answer seemed to be, TSK, how is this possible? Paul shook his head at this thought, laughing at himself for thinking too much. Although Big Brother Luo Ya was an impeccable person in all aspects, that was his royal sister, who was also a famous ice beauty in the Austin Empire. Most importantly, they had different nationalities. How could there be something fishy between an aristocrat and a royal princess of an empire? How was that possible? But that was the truth. It had been more than 2 hours since Luo Ya entered the cellar, but neither Lillian nor Luo Ya came out again. As time went by, the atmosphere at the scene became more and more strange. The whispers became louder and louder nearby. Paul recalled the movements in the cellar during this period in detail and found nothing suspicious. There were no explosions, no metallic sounds of swords clashing, and no spell fluctuations, which basically ruled out the possibility of a fight. But in the end, signs were just signs. No one knew whether this would be a turning point. As for the current situation, perhaps the two were discussing further cooperation. Paul touched his chin and thought so, not knowing that he had guessed half of it right. The discussion hadn't happened for the time being, but the further cooperation between the two was basically inevitable. It was just that it wasn't about two factions, but more personal aspects. For example, genetic cooperation. Paul normalized the development of things here, but Jellic next to him was not like this. The grey-haired boy looked at the entrance of the cellar and felt that there was a smell of love floating in the air. Although Jellic didn't know what Luo Ya saw down there, he guessed that it wasn't anything good. Luo Ya must have been alone to control her emotions. The fact that Luo Ya dared to go down alone at such a time actually explained some things. Normally speaking, even if they knew that Lillian was in a bad mood, they would avoid it if they weren't close enough. Even Paul, who was a relative in name, hesitated and didn't stand up for Lillian when she was in trouble. However, Luo Ya didn't seem to have any hesitation and went down directly. What was it that needed to be discussed to such an extent? Besides, if they really wanted to talk about something important, shouldn't they wait until the other party calmed down? There was no doubt that this was somewhat unreasonable, and another explanation was more likely. That was, the minister was there to comfort Lillian. But if that was the case, it was too different from how they usually had nothing to do with each other. Thinking about it this way, there were very few people in Chris's classroom. Would they be the type who had a good relationship behind closed doors? So after Paul, Jellic also guessed part of the truth, but he still wasn't quite sure. If the door was closed, the relationship between the two wasn't as simple as having a good relationship. The two from the consulting department who had already guessed it didn't mean to be too anxious. Paul and Jellic weren't anxious, but the members of the Purple Rose faction were a little restless. 2 hours didn't seem like a long time, but it was inconceivable to the guards who had followed Lillian for many years. After all, no matter what kind of difficulties she faced, Lillian had never been able to calm down for more than an hour. Of course, the most important thing was that Lillian wasn't alone. Luo Ya was still inside. The unprecedented situation made the personal guards gradually anxious. But when they recalled Lillian's order at that time, no one dared to directly disobey it. After thinking for a while, the Purple Rose faction stared at Paul. Although they were unwilling, if there was anyone present who could enter the cellar to check out the situation, it would undoubtedly be Paul. Whether it was his identity as the Aikman family or his position as the deputy minister of the consulting department, he was very suitable. Besides, Lillian's order didn't include Paul. With several reasons added together, Paul and Aikman accepted the order and went down into the cellar under everyone's expectant gazes. At this time, in the depths of the cellar, after the returning light had been extinguished for a long time, the two figures gradually began to regain consciousness. Lillian's consciousness woke up in a haze. The first thing she felt was the coldness of the ground and the pungent smell of blood. The young lady blinked in a daze. Then, her purple eyes gradually widened. She sat up abruptly and looked to her side. The moment she saw another familiar figure not far away, she heaved a sigh of relief and almost cried tears of joy. They're back. They're really back. The two of them are back together. After experiencing a thrilling adventure on the edge of life and death, the two of them returned in one piece. This ordinary wish was once an extravagant wish in that historical fragment. And the moment it came true, even Lillian couldn't help but feel excited. The young lady struggled to stand up and pounced on the young man beside her. Luo Ya also seemed to sense the movement nearby and gradually opened her eyes. Senior, yes, we're back. Just by touching him, Lillian felt a subtle change in her body, as if she had gained some inexplicable vitality. The strange feeling caused the black-haired girl to frown and think deeply. After a moment, the princess who thought of something slowly widened her eyes. Wait. Could it be that he's leaking time? Lillian finally discovered the truth of the matter. Her purple pupils suddenly shrank, and her face visibly paled within a few seconds. Her lips also began to tremble slightly. Oh no! A strong sense of danger flashed through Lillian's mind, and it rapidly expanded. To put it simply, leaking time was actually sharing time with others. Even though Lillian didn't know if this effect was permanent or temporary, there was one thing that was without a doubt: the ability born from this side effect was a disaster. If there were any abilities in this world that could consign the user to eternal damnation, then the ability to restore one's youth would definitely be at the top of the list. Even in Ya, where supernatural powers existed, most of the higher-ups and rulers of the races couldn't escape one thing: aging. No matter if it was a proud warrior, a saint who saved the world, a criminal who committed heinous crimes, or a traitor of the race, they were all equal in the face of time. Millions of years had passed, and the dragons that soared in the sky had vanished. The giants that galloped across the land had also vanished without a trace. Even for these mythical creatures with lifespans of tens of thousands of years, time was an existence that they could only shake their heads and sigh. As for humans, as a species with a short lifespan, their desire for longevity was much stronger than those long-lived races. And now, a secret treasure that was perfect and far surpassed any ritual or medicine had appeared. Just by touching it, it could restore one's youth. It was a beautiful young man who had lost all resistance and possessed a strong charm. When these words were put together, it was basically the greatest temptation in the world. The noble women of the Austin Empire would definitely go crazy over this. In the face of such temptation, all friends could become enemies. The Ackett family's bloodline was indeed powerful, but Luo Ya was far from reaching the end. At least for now, he was still unable to protect himself, especially in this young state. If he was caught by someone with ulterior motives and controlled by medicine or curses during the side effect period, the consequences would be unimaginable. Absolutely not. Absolutely not let anyone know about this. Lillian's face was pale as she trembled and stroked the young man. She forced herself to calm down. The first thing she could be sure of was that she couldn't stay in the academy any longer. There were too many people here who knew Luo Ya, and information could be leaked at any time. And if Lillian recalled correctly, Luo Ya had indeed told her that there were more than one evil cult members in the academy. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.